This happened when I was really young. I'm talking second or third grade. It's hard for me to remember things clearly from that long ago, but this memory stands out for reasons you'll soon understand. It was a school day, and it had been raining cats and dogs all day. After picking me up from school, my parents left the house for some upscale events. I can't remember if it was a fundraiser or a dinner party or something else entirely. Either way, they were supposed to come back home that night, but while they were gone, the storm picked up like crazy, and it became unsafe to drive long distances. So instead of driving back home, they reluctantly decided to spend the night at one of their friends' houses who lived much closer to where the event was. I remember them calling me on the house phone and repeatedly apologizing for leaving me there by myself, even though I insisted that I wasn't even hungry and I'd be fine. My mom gave me a list of things to do before bed. Lock all the doors and windows, keep at least one house light on, make sure all the blinds were closed, typical stuff. At the time, I didn't understand why they were making such a big deal about everything. I wasn't quite old enough to realize how important it was to not leave kids my age home alone. In fact, I was actually kind of excited to have the place to myself. It meant unlimited candy and no bedtime. I obviously didn't have a TV or any kind of screen in my room, so I stayed downstairs in the living room watching TV on the couch. I told myself I'd do all that stuff my mom had requested right before going to sleep, since I was planning on staying up all night anyway. But at some point later in the night, the sugar crash got to me and I accidentally fell asleep. No surprise there. I don't remember exactly what time I ended up waking up, but it was late enough for the TV to have gone into sleep mode, so 3 hours minimum. I distinctly remember being much colder when I woke up. Nothing too out of the ordinary. I mean, temperatures drop at night, but the difference was significant enough for me to instantly make the connection, even at that young age. I thought about just curling back up and going back to sleep, but then I remembered the list my mom had given me. Even at that age, I knew she'd find out if I didn't do it, and I really didn't want to get in trouble after she trusted me to stay home alone. So I forced myself off the couch and went to check the windows and doors. I went around and did everything she asked. Locked the front and back doors, closed all the blinds, checked the windows, even the light. Everything was shut tight, which confused me a little because the house still felt way colder than it should have. I even put my hand against a couple of the windows to make sure they weren't cracked open or something, but they were all sealed. I figured maybe the storm knocked out the heater or something, and I didn't think much more about it. That explanation made sense to me at the time, and I was so tired that I couldn't devote more energy to thinking about the heat. So I headed upstairs to my room, ready to crawl into bed and forget about it. When I got to my room, I finally realized just how bad the storm had gotten. Our living room is tucked into the center of the house, so I hadn't really been able to appreciate the storm from down there. My childhood bedroom has a big external window though, so I could hear everything. The rain was slamming against the glass like it was trying to get in, and every minute or so there was a burst of lightning followed by a deafening clash of thunder. I wasn't scared of storms at that age, but I do remember being concerned that a tree was going to fall on the house. That's probably why I had trouble falling back asleep, even though I had been dead tired not even 20 minutes prior. As I was lying there, trying to fall asleep, I started picking up on these odd sounds. Every so often, there were these weird creaking sounds, like shifting wood. Thing is, the entire floor is carpeted, so it couldn't have been coming from my room. At first, I thought it was a tree swaying in the wind, but the sound didn't quite fit. Even then, I knew the general sounds associated with thunderstorms. This definitely wasn't one of them. It started bothering me after a while. For whatever reason, it wasn't the storm keeping me up. It was that stupid sound. I couldn't take it much longer, so I sat up and looked around the room, not really sure what I was looking for. I listened, trying to drown out the sounds of the storm and focus in on the creaking. Lightning flashed, illuminating the whole room. Everything looked normal, but my eyes were drawn to the only wooden thing in the room, the closet. The room went dark again, and I sat there perfectly still. About a minute later, lightning flashed again, and my room was once again lit up for just a split second. And in that split second, I saw something that made me choke. The closet door was slightly ajar. It had been closed before, I was 100% sure of it. Something had opened it. There was something in my room. I didn't scream, I didn't speak, I didn't even think. I just got out of bed as quietly as I could and walked out of the room. That walk from the bed to the door felt like a 500-mile, 5-year journey. I immediately went downstairs and hid under the dining room table. Then, and only then, I started crying. I didn't know what else to do. There was someone in my house, in my room, and my parents were too far away to help me. I'm not sure how long I stayed under that table, but at one point, I heard footsteps walking down the stairs. I held my breath, knowing that any sound I made could have ended my life. They weren't normal footsteps. It sounded like whatever it was jumping and pinballing down the stairs. The footsteps got closer. They were approaching the dining room table like they knew where I was hiding. I can't tell you how scared I was. I really thought I was gonna die. And then, from under the table, I saw them. I couldn't see their upper body, but two bare feet walked into view. Two nasty, wet, and muddy legs that were tinted yellow. I couldn't tell if they were male or female legs. That's how gross and almost disfigured they looked. There were cuts all over their legs, like they had rolled around in a thorn bush. They were also stumbling, like they were struggling to even stand upright. And just as I thought it couldn't get any worse, they dropped something. It was a wrench. It clattered against the floor, and I'm telling you, it took every fiber in my being to fight back a scream. If that person bent down to pick the wrench up, they'd definitely see me. With wide eyes, I watched as that person stood still, not picking up the wrench, but not walking away either. It felt like a standoff, where any wrong move could end my life. Eventually, they finally continued walking, and I couldn't see them anymore. I listened as the chaotic footsteps stomped and stumbled around my first floor for what felt like an eternity. And then, finally, the front door opened and shut. They were gone. I stayed hidden under that table for a long time after that. Part of it was fear, but another part of it was what I can only describe as trauma. I just remember being shaken and scared. I was at the ripe age where I understood how dangerous the situation was, but not old enough to know how to deal with it. The rest of the night was kind of a blur. I picked the wrench up off the floor, not wanting my parents to find it the next morning. After making sure the front door was locked, I slunked back upstairs, crawled into bed, and fell asleep. Everything went back to normal after that. For whatever reason, I was terrified to tell my parents. I didn't want them to find out I hadn't locked the doors and done everything they had asked me to do, so I just kept the whole thing to myself. It wasn't until several years later that I told them the story, and it actually took some convincing for them to believe me. Looking back, not telling them the moment it happened was an awful decision, since there was nothing that could have been done about it so far removed from the incident. If I'm being frank, this experience traumatized me for basically the rest of my childhood. I slept with a nightlight from then on, and I developed a fear of the dark that didn't go away for a long time. I still have trouble explaining what happened that night, but I learned my lesson. Lock your doors at night. This happened over the course of 3 or 4 years when I was a kid. I can't remember exactly when I got the first one, but I started having this recurring, half-lucid nightmare maybe once every couple of months. From what I can remember, here's how it would go. I'd be lying down in bed, only the view wasn't from my first-person perspective. Instead, I'd be looking down at myself from the ceiling, like I was viewing my own bedroom through a security camera feed. The out-of-body dissociation always freaked me out. I'd try to float or swim towards my body, but I was never able to move beyond swiveling my head to look around the room. I was half lucid, so I knew it was a dream, but that didn't make me any less scared. After calming myself down, I'd start noticing strange things about my bedroom. For one, the digital clock on my nightstand would always be counting in reverse. That was typically the first strange detail I'd notice. And once I noticed that, I'd start seeing other weird stuff. There were these drawings taped to random spots on the walls and dresser, like crayon drawings you'd expect from a kid my age, but I had no memory of ever making them. I wasn't the type of kid who ever drew much, so it wasn't like I had just forgotten about them. They always showed the same thing, a row of people holding hands, all smiling, with one smaller figure who I can only imagine was me. They were always standing in front of a house with a blue roof, but I can't remember much more about the drawings than that. The other detail about the dreams that still sticks out to me is an old toy train of mine that was always sitting in a different spot on my bedroom floor, which was significant because I had lost that particular toy years prior. Anyway, after analyzing my room for a bit, I'd get this unexplainable urge to look out my bedroom window. I'd glance over, and as if it were on cue, a man would appear just a few inches from the glass. He had short gray hair and what looked like a cut on his left temple. That's honestly all I can remember about his face. He would watch me sleep for a few seconds, then start clawing at the window like he was trying to open it from the outside. That's usually when I woke up. Sometimes I immediately ran to the window, and sometimes I was too terrified to even move. But I always ended up checking one way or another. I don't know what I thought I'd find. Maybe claw marks or a smudge from where his hand had been. But there was never anything there, or anyone for that matter. After the fourth time it happened, I finally told my parents. My mom told me that recurring dreams weren't that rare, especially at my age, and my dad chimed in to remind me that they were always just one room away if I ever felt scared. I nodded and acted like that helped, but it didn't. Not really. My dad could tell I was still scared, so he took me by the hand and explored the exterior of the house with me. There was no indication that anyone had been there. No footprints, no smudges on the window, nothing. Even so, that didn't calm my nerves as much as you might think. Keep in mind, this was about 1 year in, so I was having this dream roughly once every 3 months. It wasn't happening every night, not even close, but having the exact same dream 4 times definitely means something, which I knew even at that age. But after that 4th dream though, they just stopped. For a while at least. I went nearly 6 months without a single episode, and at some point, I let myself believe it was over. It all just kind of faded into the background, the way childhood fears tend to when life gets more normal. But then it came back. I have no idea what triggered it, but one random night I had the dream again. Everything was exactly the same as I remembered. The clock, the drawings, the train, everything. But there was something different about that dream that was scaring me twice as much as the earlier ones had. I couldn't figure out what it was. Everything was following the exact same chain of events. But then, as I was looking around the room, I realized what it was. My bedroom window was open. As soon as I saw that, I woke up. There was a period of maybe 5 minutes where I couldn't move, complete and utter sleep paralysis. And it wasn't a passive sleep paralysis either. My brain was screaming at me to check the window the entire time, but I couldn't drag myself out of bed no matter how much I tried. On top of that, I felt significantly colder, as if cold air was blowing through my bedroom window, which I was convinced was wide open. Those 5 minutes were unlike any kind of fear I have ever experienced. All I could think about was how that man was moments away from climbing through my window, yet there was nothing I could do about it. When I finally regained control of my limbs, I forced myself over to the window, confirming that it was locked. I couldn't fall back asleep that night. I was too scared. I'm not sure how I was even able to function the following morning. Another couple of months went by, but I wasn't going to be fooled again. Every night before I went to bed, I thought long and hard about the dream in an attempt to brace myself for having it again. I'm not sure if this logic tracks, but I was hoping that keeping the dream on my brain would help me not get too scared should I have it again. To my surprise, that technique actually worked. The next time I had that dream, I wasn't even half as scared. I didn't even bother checking the window after waking up. By the time I had it again, I was barely scared at all. Still, something about it lingered. Not in a scary way, but enough to make me want to bring it up to my parents again. Maybe it was the way I explained it, or maybe it was because I was slightly older. But for whatever reason, they actually paid closer attention this time. I tried to provide as much detail as possible, something I hadn't done before. As I was getting to my description of the man, my parents' demeanor shifted. Not too dramatically, but enough for me to notice. Specifically, it was right as I was telling them about the cut on his forehead. Before I could even finish, my dad cut me off and asked if I was sure about the cut. I told him I was, and he looked over at my mom like there was some unspoken detail that I wasn't aware of. I asked my parents what was going on, and they assured me that everything was fine. Not wanting to upset them, I didn't inquire further. But from that point on, I started wondering if there was more to the story. As it would turn out, A few days after that conversation, my parents sat me down and came clean. It wasn't some dramatic reveal or anything. They just said there was something they wanted to tell me. My mom did most of the talking. Apparently, when I was really little, like too young to even remember, there was a man named Brian who used to watch me sometimes. They always referred to him as Uncle Brian, but he wasn't actually family, just a close friend of my dad's from college. I guess he was around a lot when I was a baby and a toddler, especially during the times when both my parents were working full-time. But something happened. My dad didn't give details, just said that there was a falling out between them, bad enough that they completely cut ties. He said he forbade Brian from ever coming near our family again, specifically from coming near me again. That was the end of it. I asked what caused the fallout, but they wouldn't tell me. They just repeated that it had nothing to do with me and that I didn't need to worry. The only other thing they told me, and this is what gave me a sick feeling, was that Brian had a noticeable scar on his forehead from a car accident he'd been in years before I was born. They didn't connect the dots out loud, but they didn't have to. I was old enough to make the connection myself. Later that night, after my mom had gone to bed, my dad lingered in the living room with me a little longer. I could tell he wanted to say more, like he hadn't been totally satisfied with how the conversation went earlier. After a few moments of silence, he told me his theory. He said he thought the dreams were my brain's way of processing something buried really deep, some memory from when I was little, before I could even form full sentences. He mentioned how close I apparently used to be with Brian, how I'd cry when he left the house, how I always wanted him to be the one to read me to sleep. My dad said he couldn't think of any other way I'd know about the scar on Brian's forehead. I didn't know what to make of that. I had no recollection of this Brian person whatsoever. Even now, I still can't recall a single memory with him in it. I had no choice but to move on with my life, though, recurring dream or not. Another handful of months passed. I'm doing my best to describe the timeline as accurately as possible, but it's hard to remember exactly how much time passed in between each dream. That said, the frequency decreased after talking to my parents. I had the dream only once or maybe twice within the next year, but things took a very dark turn sometime in year 4. One night after waking up from the dream, I glanced over at my window, just out of habit, and this time, I actually saw something move. It was just a flicker, but I was 100% sure something had just moved from right outside my window. And just like that, all the fear I had spent years trying to prevent came rushing back. It was actually worse. I jumped out of bed and screamed for my parents, who took me very seriously. My dad sprinted outside in his bare feet while my mom held me tightly. Eventually, my dad came back and started whispering stuff to my mom. They told me to stay put while they called the police. I listened to them and stayed in their room, although I don't remember ever hearing any sirens or other voices besides theirs that night. My dad insisted everything was fine and that the police were going to take care of things. The next day, he confessed to me that he had seen what he thought were extremely faint footprints underneath my bedroom window. I asked him if he thought it was Brian, and he said that was impossible, since they had moved and Brian didn't know where we lived. My dad promised me that nothing bad was going to happen ever, and he would turn out to be right. I never had that dream again. My parents don't like talking about this incident, and I can see why. I'm still yet to get a straight answer out of them, but I've since stopped trying. What I can't wrap my head around is the sickening thought that every time I had that dream, there really was someone outside my window watching me. Was it really plausible that someone had been periodically stalking me for 4 years? It doesn't track, and I can't decide what's scarier. If it really was Brian watching me, or just some complete stranger that my brain associated with him for whatever reason. And who knows how that somehow got translated into my dreams. I've done research, and I still don't even know how that would be possible. Maybe he was making a noise or something, and my brain picked up on it. I really can't say. What I can say is that I'm 95% sure my parents never called the police that night. That's something I will likely never get an explanation for. I'll most likely never get any answers regarding this experience since it happened so long ago. But if I do, I'll send an update. This happened a couple of years ago, right before school ended. It was the last day of 8th grade. It was exactly what you'd expect on the final day of middle school. Excitement and bittersweet goodbyes. Everyone was running around, scribbling signatures and cheesy messages in each other's yearbooks. My middle school was huge, easily over 1,000 students, so to keep things manageable, the teachers collected our yearbooks and passed them around to different classrooms, making sure everyone who wanted to got a chance to sign. I'm sure you could see how that could create problems. Anyone who wanted to could write whatever they wanted in anyone's yearbook. The teachers tried their best to prevent things from getting out of hand, but I knew a few kids who wrote some mean messages to people they didn't like. At the end of the day, when I got my yearbook back, I flipped through the pages eagerly, reading all the goofy notes from my friends. But as I scanned the pages, something caught my eye. There was a signature below the face of someone I had never seen before. His name was Samuel Robinson III, a name I'm going to remember for as long as I live. The message he wrote was short, simple, and honestly a bit unsettling. It read, "Hags, I'll be seeing you again." I stared at the page, confused out of my mind. I'd never even spoken a single word to this Samuel kid. It wasn't like there was anything I could do about it, though. The school year was over, so I couldn't see him even if I wanted to. I just chalked it up to some weird kid being weird, or maybe an honest mistake. Either way, I stopped thinking about it. A few hours passed, and before I knew it, I was at home hosting a sleepover in my basement with my best friends Kevin, David, and Kieran. The four of us ate Doritos and played Call of Duty all night. My parents' bedroom was 3 floors above us, so we didn't have to worry much about keeping the noise down. We were messing around on my dad's rowing machine sometime just before 2 when we heard a sharp knock at the storm door. The sound instantly silenced us. Who the hell would knock on the storm door? It must have been someone who either didn't want to wake my parents up, or knew we were down there, or both. It didn't make sense. The person kept knocking in the same rhythmic pattern. I could tell Kieran was about to say something, and I couldn't stop him in time. In a loud and assertive voice, he asked who was there. I wanted to knock him out. He had basically broadcasted to whoever was out there that we were down there. My basement doesn't have any external windows, so it was unlikely that they had known we were down there, but now they did. After a long pause and no more knocking, a muffled voice answered back. He said, "Come around to the back door," in a high-pitched voice that genuinely sounded cheerful, like he was a friend of ours trying to join the sleepover. It was definitely a teenager's voice too, and it didn't sound like someone who was pretending to raise their voice either. I was pretty scared, I can't lie. My friends were seemingly unfazed though, like they thought it was somehow exciting that some random kid was outside my house. They insisted that I at least check it out, and even though I didn't want to, they pressured me into it. We crept upstairs, careful not to make too much noise. I approached the back door slowly, trying to ignore the pounding in my chest. Through the narrow glass pane beside it, I could see a shadowy figure standing under the dim light. I got a little closer, and his face came into view. My jaw nearly hit the floor when I realized who it was. It was him. It was that kid Samuel Robinson III who had signed my yearbook. My friends went to go open the door, God knows why, but I stopped them, saying I knew who it was. I explained to them what had happened, and that changed their mood a bit. Keep in mind, Sam was still standing outside while we were talking, and he could definitely see in at us. He must have noticed how freaked out I was, because he started motioning to the side of the house like he wanted me to go over to the window. You might be wondering why none of us were taking the situation more seriously. I honestly think it was because it wasn't like some older, strange man was harassing us. It was a kid from our own school. Still, I wasn't opening the door for him. Instead, I went over to my kitchen window and cracked it open just a tiny bit. My friends followed me and stood a little off to the side. He walked over to the window and I asked him what he wanted, telling him I recognized him from our yearbook. He said, "Oh, so you got my message," and introduced himself as Sam. Then he went on to say he always watched me from afar and that we could have been good friends. I agreed with him just so that I wouldn't piss him off, but there was 0% chance I would have been friends with this kid given any circumstances. I didn't want to press him right away, but I had to know, so I asked him how he knew where I lived. He didn't respond, and I didn't know what to say. Before I could de-escalate the situation, David called him a creepy stalker and told him to piss off. Sam's smile disappeared. He tilted his head like he didn't understand what David had just said. Then, just as quickly, his expression twisted into something I can only describe as hatred. He went from passive and honestly kind of friendly to aggressive and angry. He started screaming things at me, how he hated my friends and thought we should all die, how my ex hated me and random stuff he had no right knowing. He reached toward the window and tried to force it open, but I jammed it shut and locked it. He started snarling at the window and banging on it like an animal. He was 2 seconds away from shattering it, I'm telling you. We must have caused quite the commotion because my parents came rushing down the stairs, demanding to know why we had woken them up. That's when Sam ran away. I told my parents what happened as quickly as I could, and my dad raced outside in his underwear. He came back a few minutes later, saying he had no idea where the kid went. I'm not sure why, but my parents didn't call the police. They just told us to go back to sleep and they deal with the school the following morning, just to give the kid the benefit of the doubt. The next morning, they contacted the school. That's when we learned the disturbing truth. Sam had been expelled a few weeks before the year finished, and he shouldn't have ever been at the school on the last day. Apparently, the yearbooks were printed before his expulsion, which explained why his picture was still included. That meant he had snuck into the school somehow just to write me that message, which freaked me out beyond belief. Despite working with the school to find out more, nobody could track Sam down. It was like he and his parents didn't exist. The whole thing was a pretty big deal, but the school did what they could to keep things under wraps. To this day, I still have no idea how he knew where I lived. That's what freaks me out the most. The running theory is that he was a mentally challenged and troubled young boy who took a strange liking to me for whatever reason, and then he stalked me for who knows how long. My parents were worried for weeks. It's something we don't talk about anymore because it's just uncomfortable, but living in that same house has never felt the same ever since. This happened a decent while ago, back when I was 22. Enough years passed to the point where I feel safe talking about it. I was fresh out of college with a desirable job and minimal expenses since I was living in my childhood home with my parents. Imagine that, racking up considerable savings without having to worry about food or a place to sleep, and all the while having full access to the room I grew up in, my car, and all my hometown comforts. It's safe to say I was living in pure bliss. Believe me, I knew how lucky I was to have parents who allowed me to stay at home and rent free. I know a lot of people don't have that option, so it's something I never took for granted, but not everything was as stress-free as you might think. What I'm about to tell you happened not even 1 month into my time back at home. I've never been what people my age like to call a party girl. I don't drink excessive amounts of alcohol, I don't spend every ounce of my free time at clubs, and I definitely don't allow men to dictate my life in any way. That's just how I was raised. My father is the most important man in my life, and hookup culture disgusts me. Because of all that, my life is pretty routine. Wake up, satisfy my caffeine addiction, go to work, go to the gym, read a bit of my book at home, mess around on my phone, and go to sleep. Weekends are for hiking, mini road trips, board games, and whatever else I decide I want to spend my time doing. But one random weekend, my closest friend from college, Lindsay, invited me and our other 2 friends, Sabrina and Thea, to spend a few days at her family's beach house. I'd never been, but from the way Lindsay talked about it, the place sounded like a dream. Quiet, tucked away from the touristy chaos on its own private beach, and just a short walk from the water. To put it bluntly, Lindsay's family is loaded. I think both her parents were neurosurgeons, so I had a feeling her beach house would be insane, and I was far from disappointed. When I first laid eyes on it, I was awestruck. Look, I'm no architect, but I know a modern style house when I see one, and Lindsay's must have been ultra modern because it looked more like a covert military safe house than a personal home. I'd love to show you guys pictures of it, believe me, I've got plenty, but out of respect for Lindsay's family, I think that would be in really poor taste even if what I'm about to tell you didn't happen. The 4 of us unloaded our stuff and decided where we'd be sleeping. Lindsay obviously had enough individual bedrooms for all of us to occupy, but what would be the fun in that? Instead, the 4 of us stayed in the same room, one of the kids' bedrooms that had 2 sets of bunk beds and its own attached bathroom.
We'd been staying there 3 nights, which, in my opinion, is the perfect amount of time to spend coupled up with anyone other than your family. I tend to be relatively irritable, so anyone who's not clean or polite tends to tick me off pretty easily. Not that any of my friends are, but you know how it is. I know I told you about my relatively boring lifestyle already, but if there was a time to drink, it was that weekend with my friends, so I definitely planned on letting loose a little more than I ordinarily would. We wanted to keep the first night pretty chill though, so we walked down to the private beach connected to the house and sat in the sand, stargazing. The 4 of us were drinking White Claws and listening to house music on Sabrina's speaker when we noticed something in the distance. It was this faint, flickering light emanating from somewhere further down the shore. The 4 of us quieted down a bit and watched the light flicker on and off. The sight was kind of hypnotic, as eerie as it was. After a while, it became clear that the light was swinging back and forth, like a handheld flashlight someone was walking with. And soon after, we realized that's just what it was. It looked like 3 or 4 people casually walking in our direction, not running or stumbling or moving strangely, but strolling at a leisurely pace. As they got closer, we started hearing the sound of laughter, which caused all of us to relax a bit. Considering how late it was most likely just a group of teenagers or even people our age. They must have noticed us because at some point, one of them yelled out hi in a friendly voice. It was a guy's voice, and he sounded around our age. Thea yelled back, and we made some small talk while they made their way over to us. As they approached, we could see that it was a group of 3 guys who looked maybe a year or 2 older than we were. They all had that typical beach boy look, which I could tell right away my friends were digging, especially Thea. She's a bit crazy when it comes to guys, so I can't say I was too surprised. She knows how I feel about her lifestyle, so it's not like I'm saying anything crazy. To be fair, she is drop-dead gorgeous, and I've never seen a guy not take a liking to her. The guys sat down with their beers, and the 7 of us continued drinking. It was actually a really great time. The guys weren't overtly flirtatious, but they weren't boring either. Fast forward an hour and several drinks later, and they ultimately invited us back to their place. Personally, I was exhausted and was leaning towards going to sleep, but I could tell all 3 of my friends wanted to continue hanging out with the boys, especially Thea, of course. I decided not to spoil everyone's fun and called it a night for myself, telling my friends to go on without me. There were only 3 guys after all, and I had no intention of hooking up with anyone that night. I walked back towards Lindsay's house while the 6 of them walked along the beach, presumably towards wherever the guys were staying. I washed up and went to bed. Sometime after 3 in the morning, I woke up to a FaceTime call from Lindsay, which was confusing since she should have either been home by then or asleep next to one of the guys. I answered her in a groggy voice, and what she said woke me up instantly. She basically screamed into the phone that Thea and Sabrina had been kidnapped and I needed to get her car immediately. Her words were like a bucket of ice-cold water being splashed across my face. I've never felt a more intense sense of fear and adrenaline. I didn't waste a second. My hands were literally shaking as I quickly threw on some clothes and sprinted down the stairs. I asked her why she had called me instead of the police, and she reassured me that she already had. She told me to stay on the line as she walked me through it. With her instruction, I managed to open the driveway gate, find her car keys, and speed out of there in a matter of minutes. She told me they were about 10 houses down the beach to the left, so that's where I started driving. She described the car and told me what direction it had gone in, and I slammed on the gas to try and catch up. There wasn't a single car on the road, and I was driving at an insanely unsafe speed. It was a miracle I didn't get pulled over. After a few minutes of driving, I noticed a car matching Lindsay's description driving slowly in the distance. Then I hung up the phone, called the police, and told them exactly where we were. The dispatcher told me to keep my distance so as not to alert them to the situation, so that's what I did. After what felt like forever, I spotted cop lights up ahead. The car ahead of me didn't try to evade the police. I can only imagine that they assumed it was an unrelated stop. I pulled the car over and watched everything unfold. It was pure chaos. The cops forcibly removed all 3 men from the SUV at gunpoint. They put them in cuffs and escorted them back to one of the cruisers. Then, one of the officers walked over to the trunk of the car and pulled it open to reveal both Thea and Sabrina, bound and, from the looks of it, pretty badly bruised. As horrifying as the whole experience was, it was nothing compared to the sequence of events told from their perspective. All three of them were comfortable with me writing this, by the way. We're still close in contact, so I obviously asked them. But none of them wanted to write it themselves, and for good reason. To keep things short, after I went to bed, they all continued drinking. Lindsay is the only one who remembers things clearly, since she was trying to be at least a little responsible given it was her family's house we were staying in. At some point, the guys Thea and Sabrina were with suggested they all go to bed. So the four of them split off while Lindsay told the third guy she was going home. He was really upset about that, which Lindsay initially thought was because he wanted to get with her. She told him she would have been down but had to watch her house, and he got angry. They yelled at each other for a bit, and he ended up telling Lindsay to get the hell out of his house and never come back, which she was more than happy doing. Halfway home though, she realized she had forgotten her purse, so she went back to get it. That's when she saw the guys throwing Thea and Sabrina into the back of the car before driving off. She called the police, then me, and that was that. Thea's parents are both lawyers, and they jumped through dozens of hoops to do two things: keep the event as far away from the public sphere as possible, and make sure those guys got maximum prison sentences. They accomplished both. Turns out the house they were staying in didn't even belong to them. It was owned by some random old couple who were on vacation in a different country. That, plus the slew of other crimes they were charged with, put them away for a long time. Although I still think there's no sentence long enough that can properly compensate for what they did. As much as I hate admitting it, this traumatized me for years. I couldn't do beaches, late nights, or talking to strangers, no matter how harmless they seemed, or how safe a situation felt. I became antisocial and drifted away from the girls for a little, but luckily that's since changed. I can't even begin to imagine how this incident affected Thea and Sabrina. Part of me feels like not remembering anything is a blessing in disguise. I think the craziest part about the whole thing is the fact that had I not gone home, I might not have been able to reach Lindsay's car in time. And had it not been for that, the police may have never found those guys' car.
This happened just last year. My buddy Jimmy is pretty involved and well connected within the music community. By music community, I'm more specifically referring to the dance/electronic music scene all along the East Coast, predominantly New Jersey and New York. It's actually pretty impressive what he and his team have been able to accomplish in just 2 years. The general gist is this: their company hosts what they call events at high-profile venues, typically the most well-known club or party space in whatever city they happen to be in. Then they outsource the talent, which, mind you, is typically a very well-known and sometimes borderline famous DJ. I'm not too involved or invested in that scene, so I'm not exactly sure who they've gotten to perform, but I will tell you that there have been some huge names in the mix. But enough context. Jimmy and I go way back. I'm talking 20 plus years. I've basically known him my entire life, and he's been my best friend for damn near most of it. Because of that, he lets me, along with a bunch of our other hometown friends, come to his shows for free and hang out with the talent in the VIP section. It's actually really cool, and something I wish I expressed my gratitude for more often. Jimmy was scheduled to host a huge event the weekend of July 4th on the Jersey Shore. It was going to be their biggest one yet, and all our mutual friends were going. Jimmy invited me to come down early with him, and I obviously obliged. The two of us made the hour-and-a-half drive with our other friend Ryan, and we found ourselves at the venue a good 4 hours before the doors opened. Ryan and I didn't have much to do while Jimmy and his team set up, so we decided to get a bit of a head start on the alcohol consumption. Jimmy and his team were entitled to as much free booze as they desired, compliments of the venue, and Ryan and I definitely took advantage of that. By the time the first DJ started his set, Ryan and I were more than a little buzzed, to put it mildly. It was 4th of July weekend after all, so we felt like our degenerate activities were justified. Fast forward a couple hours, and Ryan and I were completely wasted. I honestly don't remember a time since then when I was that drunk, not even close. Don't get me wrong, Ryan and I are grown men, we can handle our alcohol. Throwing up, making fools of ourselves wasn't the issue though. It was genuinely just the problem of having lower impulse control and worse decision making. But either way, we were having a great time, at least from what I can remember. The event was winding down, and it was getting to that point in the night where you either figured out how you were getting home, or who you were going home with, or both.
Jimmy had rented an Airbnb really close by and promised both Ryan and I a bed, so the first issue wasn't a concern. The second problem, though, that was what was on my mind. The two of us danced over to the bar and started talking to some girls we found attractive, and before long, we had figured out who we were going to spend the rest of the night with. Neither of us are Calvin Klein models, but we're both above 6 feet tall. For whatever reason, the vast majority of guys who hang around the Jersey Shore are usually shorter than average, so being tall is an even bigger boost than it usually is. And for whatever reason, that seems to be the main attribute most girls on the Jersey Shore seek out. Not looks, not build, not intelligence, but height. Don't ask me why. The Jerseyan female mind is still something I have yet to comprehend. I'm probably botching their names, but I'm fairly sure the two girls introduced themselves as Gianna and Marcela. Us meeting them coincides with where my ability to recall events precisely becomes a bit hazy, so there may be gaps in the story from here on out. From what I can remember, it was actually Marcela who suggested we all leave together and continue to party elsewhere, which Ryan and I weren't going to argue with. Gianna handed the two of us a drink and insisted that we get on their level before heading out, even though we had both probably consumed the fluid equivalent of her body weight in alcohol already. I know that whole dynamic. Girls getting guys drinks sounds a little unorthodox, and it is, but these girls were clearly wealthy given how they were dressed. After downing the drinks, the four of us started moving towards the venue's exit. The moment we stepped outside, Marcela suggested we go back to her place, which was pretty close by and also right on the beach. Her saying that actually surprised me a little. I was fully anticipating going back to our Airbnb, considering the guys were usually the ones to host in situations like this. But both girls insisted that Marcela's beach house was definitely nicer than whatever inland Airbnb we found for the night. She had a point, so I didn't argue, and neither did Ryan. We walked along the beach, talking the whole time. The girls seemed really intelligent and knowledgeable based on the conversations we had, and I remember finding it so refreshing to talk about something other than nightlife and whatever other garbage I'm used to talking to girls about for once. Not just girls, drunk people in general. At one point, I actually felt kind of embarrassed for being so drunk because I felt like I couldn't articulate myself well enough and looked like an idiot. That's when I realized I actually was feeling drunker than I had been 15 minutes earlier. But it wasn't a drunk I was used to feeling. I felt like my body was melting under my weight, as if I were going to collapse uncontrollably any second. My legs felt flimsy, almost like cardboard, if that makes any sense. Moving my limbs, mouth, and even my eyes became increasingly more difficult, and there was a moment where my extremities started feeling a little numb. But then, just as quickly as the feeling arose, it passed, back to normal drunkenness, at least for the time being. Just then, we arrived at the beach house. It was insane. I'm probably exaggerating because I was so drunk, but it looked like what I imagined a professional athlete's beach house to look like. We went inside, and after taking our shoes off, found ourselves in what I'm guessing was a living room. I say guessing because the level of opulence in there was just so foreign to anything I'm used to. It was decorative, but somehow minimalistic. Even those descriptions are opposite. There were honest-to-God sculptures on pedestals in there, but it didn't feel cluttered or overly showy, and everything on display seemed to blend right into the walls like they were just extensions of the room. I wish I had the wherewithal to take a picture, but again, my mind was elsewhere. Evidently, so was Ryan's, because not 15 minutes after stepping foot in the house, he and Marcela had disappeared somewhere in that maze of a house, which left me alone with Gianna. She leaned in to kiss me, and that's the last thing I remember before blacking out. Not her kissing me, but leaning in to kiss me. That's where everything cuts off. I don't remember feeling woozy again or drinking more or doing anything else, but there's a huge gap in my memory that spans several hours and will not come back no matter what I try. And the thing is, I know I didn't pass out because there are texts on my phone sent from me proving I was still conscious. There's digital proof that I was sentient, but I don't remember one bit of it. And before you say I just simply blacked out from alcohol, this was different. I rarely ever black out, but all the times I have, I can still remember bits and pieces of the night, scattered moments here and there, enough for me to string together a continuous sequence of events at the very least. Keep in mind, those were also all times where I was drunker than I was that night, so that's another reason I think a generic blackout isn't a reasonable explanation for what happened. Plus, Ryan experienced the exact same thing at essentially the exact same time, which is way too specific to be coincidental. Here's the next thing I remember. Waking up with the sun directly overhead in a random set of bushes over an hour away from where the event was. Something I didn't know yet because my phone wasn't in my pocket. In fact, nothing was in my pocket at all. Both my wallet and keys were gone, but it gets worse. It wasn't even my pocket to begin with. I was wearing someone else's clothes, and not Ryan's either, a complete stranger's. The only personal belonging of mine I still had in my possession was my shoes, and even those were messed up. Both shoes had the shoelaces removed and were soaking wet. My head was pounding, and everything felt disoriented, like I was waking up from anesthesia. I didn't even sit up right away. I just stared at the sky for a minute, trying to make sense of where I was. Bushes, someone else's clothes, no wallet, no phone, no keys. Based on my shoes, it was like I had been in the water recently, but it didn't smell like salt water or chlorine. The worst part about the whole thing was the blankness. I genuinely couldn't remember anything past Gianna leaving, like I already said. That's when the panic started to creep in. I wasn't just hungover, I was scared. I had no idea how I got there. What if I'd gotten into a fight or crashed a car? What if someone drugged me? I didn't have a single point of reference for the last 10 hours. I stood up and realized there wasn't a single landmark around me. It didn't look like a beach town, which also scared me. The road ahead just curved into more trees, but just across the street, maybe a few hundred feet away, was a 7-Eleven. It was genuinely the only thing in sight, so I headed straight for it. I asked the guy behind the counter if I could use his phone, telling him that mine had been stolen. He stared at me for a second, probably debating whether or not I was trying to scam him, but then he slid it across the counter. The first number that came to my mind was my sister's. It was the only number besides my mom or dad's I still memorized, and there was no way in hell I was calling my parents. My sister picked up right away, and I tried explaining things the best I could. She ended up giving me Ryan's number, which I ended up calling several times, but to no avail. That's when I started wondering if what had happened to me happened to him too. Drugged, robbed, dumped in some random bushes an hour away. I was just about to call the police, when what do you know, Ryan walks into the same 7-Eleven. We just stared at each other for a second before dabbing each other up. He then told me his version of things, and you guessed it, it was the same story, damn near exactly. That sealed it for us. We called the police, making sure to thank the 7-Eleven worker profusely. Fast forward a few minutes, and we're now recounting our story to the police outside the store. To their credit, they took everything we said seriously, at first. But the more we told them, the more their questions started turning. Were we sure we didn't just drink too much? Maybe we wandered off and passed out somewhere. They weren't accusing us outright, but it was clear they weren't entirely convinced something criminal happened. I told them it was unlikely we would have drunkenly wandered into a town an hour away by foot, and I don't think they liked that remark very much. I gave them my sister's number and asked them to call her. She was already tracking my phone through Find My iPhone. To all of our collective surprise, my phone was showing up in the middle of a parking lot a few minutes' drive away. The officers agreed to drive us, and sure enough, both our phones were sitting on the pavement next to each other. While it was great to have my phone back, that only affirmed the police's theory that we had just been drunk. They started saying that we probably hadn't even been robbed, that we had lost our wallets the same way we had lost our phones. We tried convincing the police to check out the house Marcela brought us to, the one she claimed was hers, but they weren't having it. They told us we were probably just too drunk and didn't remember things correctly. One of them even said, "Happens more than you think." Then they gave us their cards and told us to call if we remembered anything else. It was actually shocking how reluctant they were to even connect us to other officers that would be willing to help. They told us to find a ride home since our phones were still charged, and they just left us there. After they left, I went through my phone for the first time, and things got even weirder. There were texts sent from me to a ton of people I knew. Jimmy, my parents, a few coworkers, even some girls I had been talking to. All normal sounding stuff I might have said if I had actually had a calm, coherent night. The texts genuinely sounded like me, but from a continuity standpoint, they didn't make any sense when considered all together. One message to Jimmy thanked him for the event and said we'd crashed at a buddy's place. One to my dad said we were safe and had found a couch to sleep on. There was another to a girl I'd been texting that just said something casual, like I was hanging out at home and thinking about her. None of those texts made any sense, and mostly contradicted each other. I realized I had a ton of missed calls and texts from Jimmy, so I called him. He sounded relieved to hear from me, saying he thought Ryan and I had died or something. He told us to stay put, he'd come pick us up. In the meantime, Ryan and I canceled all our cards, but interestingly, none of them had been used, despite the likely fact that they had been in those girls' possession for several hours. The entire ride home, we talked non-stop about what could have happened. None of it made any sense. Yeah, we had been drugged, that much was clear, but that didn't explain things. First of all, I don't know of any kind of roofie that has those effects, like an induced blackout. Everything I've read just said those drugs make you fall asleep, but again, I was conscious, as the texts confirm. Plus, why go to such lengths just to rob two random guys? Especially if you weren't going to at least even attempt to use their credit cards. Two guys who walked up to you, no less. And in such a risky place, too, your own house. Or was it a house they had broken into? Both were equally risky. Jimmy thought we had been targeted, but like I just said, we had been the ones to approach the girls, so we couldn't have been targeted. And all this isn't even mentioning how or why we miraculously found ourselves in a random town an hour away wearing other people's clothing. As crazy as it sounds, both Ryan and I checked ourselves for incisions, thinking maybe some of our organs had been harvested, but there was nothing. Jimmy suggested that maybe they had just given us some exotic drugs, which I guess makes sense, but someone had driven us to that town, and someone other than those girls had switched clothes with us. We never got an answer, but it's not like we just forgot about the whole thing. Ryan and I ended up driving all the way back to the shore just to go looking for that house. We tried our best to retrace our steps, knowing that if we just walked along the boardwalk, we'd eventually find the house, since it was on the beach. And we actually did find it. The two of us walked up the walkway and rang the doorbell. An older man opened the door, asking us what we wanted. I did the talking. Not wanting to reveal too much or potentially incriminate myself, I simply asked him if a girl named Marcela lived here, or if he had a daughter or granddaughter around our age. He gave me a hard no, and I made up some BS story that there was a girl who lied about owning this house, which he actually found pretty funny. And that was that. I would be lying if I said I didn't walk away from that house with a sick, unsettling feeling in my stomach. I can't even describe it as fear, just a sickening discomfort, like something truly awful had happened to me and my friend that night, and I'd never get to the bottom of it. For a long time after that, I was convinced those girls had been involved in something much, much bigger that neither me nor Ryan could even conceive. That maybe they had been planning to kidnap or kill us, and decided not to go through with it at the last second for whatever reason. I know I'll never have an update, but if something else happens, I'll definitely send something.
Number 4. Me and the girlfriend were on our way to her parents' house. I was invited to Thanksgiving dinner with them, which was a huge honor for me since I'd only met her parents 3 times. I was also nervous since her grandparents and aunts and uncles would also be there who I had never met. We had a long trek from my house to her parents' house. It would be a good hour-long drive. About 45 minutes into the drive, we had to stop for gas. We pulled up into a literally dead Gulf station right off the highway, and I decided to fill up with premium for once to do my car a favor. Of course, it was cheaper to pay with cash, so I went inside with my head down as I dug my hand inside my wallet searching for a 10 and a 20, and when I pulled the bills out, I instinctively looked up and said, 30 on 2 please. But I stopped mid-sentence. There was no one there. I looked for a bell on the counter. None. I simply called out, anyone there? There wasn't even a back door behind the counter that you would assume would lead to some kind of employees-only room. No, it was just completely empty. The only other door in this little gas station besides the entrance was the single bathroom, and that door was open, exposing the blackness from within the bathroom. I figured maybe whoever was manning the cash register may have just gone outside for something. I walked back outside and shrugged my shoulders at my girlfriend out of confusion. I looked around for maybe a porta potty or an ice machine or something that could be distracting a potential cashier, but there was nothing. It was a relatively small little station with foliage surrounding it in almost all directions. I figured maybe somebody could be behind the building smoking a bogey or a doobie, so I went back there as a final attempt. Nope, just a dumpster sitting under a dimly lit roof light. Ugh, I figured I'd just pay credit at this point and turn it back. But as I did, somebody from out in the woods called over to me in a kind of whispery yell. My heart skipped a beat when I heard this. Hey! Hey! I kept hearing it from the woods. I took out my phone and flipped on the flashlight just to skim the outer tree line for anybody who could be hiding in there. As my now shaking hand rotated the phone slowly, the light momentarily revealed somebody from behind a tree. I took off back to the car and stepped on it out of there. My girlfriend was scared shitless just in reaction to my fear. I told her about the bizarre thing that just happened, and from that point on, she kept looking through the rearview mirrors just to make sure we weren't being followed. We pulled up to the next gas station we could find, this time one that actually had a cashier. I paid him $30 and began filling up. A van pulled up to the pump right behind mine, and a man wearing a cap stepped out staring intently at me. I tried to act as if I didn't notice him, but when it got to the point where he was staring at me for at least 20 seconds straight, I had to look at him and ask him if there was a problem. He finally turned away. The second I was done, I hopped back in the car and took off once more. We made it to her parents' house safely, and I don't believe we were followed. Now, I wouldn't have shared this story if it weren't for the fact that a few weeks later, I did some research and found out that a 33-year-old Indian man who worked at the gas station we had stopped at had been murdered and his body was stuffed in the woods behind the station. I immediately gave the police a tip about the guy who I saw at the station who was surely caught on camera. The following year on Thanksgiving, a similar murder happened at another gas station. We have since nicknamed him the Thanksgiving Killer. I fear only the worst once more this year, as he has still not been caught. Number 3. Walmart attracts the weirdest people. It was Black Friday, meaning me and my brothers were going video game shopping. Our first and only stop was Walmart. The place was absolutely mobbed, and being Walmart, it was mobbed with the wrong kinds of people. Gross, weird, and just creepy people everywhere trying to save a few bucks on already cheap products. We rode the escalators upstairs to the video game section. I was looking for the latest Call of Duty game personally, but my brothers were looking for some other game I don't remember. Then, out of nowhere, some creepy, heavy, oldish man who smelled like vomit walked up to me and said, "You like video games, huh?" "Yeah," I said. I began to slowly slide away just to show that I wasn't interested in conversation. "My son likes video games too. Maybe you should come over and play some with him. He really craves company." The man gave me a creepy smile. "Oh, no, I'm not from around town, sorry." That's all I could think of saying. I didn't even give him a chance to keep this conversation going. Hell, I wasn't obligated to stand there and talk to this guy. I simply gave him a smile and called my brother's name out while walking away just to seem distracted. I did a quick backwards glance. He was just staring at me as I walked away. I made it to the next aisle over and immediately felt comfort in being next to my brothers. I waited around until they finally found their game and we headed over to the checkout counters. The lines were insane. I knew it would probably take 10 to 15 minutes just to make it to the counters, so I took that opportunity to check out some of the jeans and t-shirt sales. At one point, I found myself in probably the most secluded corner of the store checking out some t-shirts when someone grabbed my arm hard. I thought it was my brother messing with me, so I turned around and told him to fuck off. But it wasn't him. It was the man. I started calling for help, screaming that I didn't know this man. Some people came over and stared, but that was about it. The man let go and walked away. I don't know what he was thinking or planning on trying in such a public place. I didn't tell my brothers what happened out of embarrassment, but they picked up on the fact that I was quiet afterwards. "It's nothing," I kept telling them. We got into my brother's Camaro, and when I sat down, I looked to the entrance of the Walmart. There he fucking was, sitting at the bench, facing me. As we were leaving the lot, we had to pass right in front of the store. I got one last look at the creepy man. His head moved ever so slightly to constantly face me, even through the car window at night. I gave him the finger, but it didn't seem to influence him in the slightest. That was the last I ever saw of him. Walmart attracts the weirdest people. Number 2. It was Black Friday 2013, and I decided to be one of those people who gets up at 3 a.m. to get some early deals. Home Depot was having crazy deals on artificial Christmas trees, so I wanted to get there early and buy one for my family. They opened their doors at 3 a.m. on the spot, 3 hours earlier than usual for Black Friday. Surprisingly, only me and one other guy were waiting to get in. I guess everyone else was at Best Buy or the mall. I found a nice 9-foot tall artificial Christmas tree, originally for $200, but at that moment half off for only $100. I asked one of the few employees working at that hour to help me carry the box to the checkout and then to my car. The parking lot was still surprisingly empty for Black Friday. I figured maybe I didn't have to come so early. I tipped the guy and got in my car ready to leave when someone knocked on my window. I lowered the window, and some guy, mid-20s, beanie, black, and tall, leaned into my window asking if I had change. I opened the little compartment in between seats where I normally keep change, and it was actually empty. I didn't want to have to hand him a 10, so I said, "Nah, man, sorry." He looked disappointed, and I actually felt bad. He then asked me if I could give him a lift to the nearest gas station. I was a bit nervous about letting a stranger in my car, but guess what? I let him in. He did not thank me, which kind of hurt, I guess because I'm a little sensitive. I asked him if he knew of any close-by gas stations. He just said, "Nah." A few seconds later, I asked him why he needed to go to a gas station, and I swear to God, he didn't answer. It's not like he didn't hear me. He just flat out ignored me. I stopped looking at him at that point because I was feeling a bit uncomfortable now. I kept driving down main and side roads, but there was no goddamn gas stations anywhere. I was trying not to look in his direction, but I could tell he was staring at me. Every turn I made, every stop sign I stopped at, he was staring at me. I was sweating now. This guy was freaking me out. I felt like at any moment he could just grab my throat and I'd be done for. At last, I could see a gas station just beyond a light which had just turned red. Why did it have to turn red just now? I thought to myself. I could still feel his stare, even as I looked the other way. I finally decided to sum up the balls and looked at him. I felt his cold, emotionless stare run straight through my eyes into my soul. Are you okay? I asked him. He ever so slightly nodded his head, almost not even noticeable. The light turned green, and I pulled into the gas station. He stepped out and stood by the sidewalk and watched me as I pulled away. When I got past the intersection, I laughed out of joy and the ridiculousness of the situation. But then I realized something. I patted myself down and then began to panic. I was missing something. My phone. I was only a few blocks away, so I made a U-turn and headed back to the gas station. He was gone already. I drove home and confirmed that my phone was missing. I knew I had left it in the cup holder of my car. My phone had all of my info on it. I contemplated calling the police, but I didn't. I couldn't even sleep that night in fear of some freak stranger having my address. The next night, after getting home from our 2-day delayed Thanksgiving dinner, I found my front door was open and my entire house was trashed. I called the police with my neighbor's phone. They didn't find him in there, but they found his prints everywhere. The only thing, the prints did not match anyone on record. Number 1. It was Thanksgiving. I had half the family over, along with the next door neighbors, Tom and his wife. They don't have a big family, so they used to come over to watch the game with us on Thanksgiving. After eating dinner, we all sat in the living room to watch football, except for my daughters Tracy and Michelle, who aren't into football. At the time, Michelle was only 13 years old and Tracy was 16. During halftime, I decided to go up to Michelle's room to get her to come down. She finally budged and came down to the living room. Me, Tom, and a few in-laws went outside to smoke. Me and Tom talked about his son, Sam. Apparently, Sam had gone back home to be alone and watch movies. He had been with us earlier. Tom joked that he was probably just watching porn, though. I laughed. I stared up at one of the windows to my house, the window to Michelle's room. There was someone looking out the window. What the hell is Michelle doing back in her room? I thought. But then I realized that wasn't Michelle. In fact, I didn't know who the hell that was. I excused myself from the group and stormed back inside and upstairs to Michelle's room. Michelle followed after she saw me enter her room. "Did someone just come in here?" I asked. "No, why?" I looked around the room. It was completely empty. I nudged Michelle to go back downstairs while I turned off the lamp. We went back to the living room where the game would be starting up momentarily. I finally decided to ask everyone if anyone had been in Michelle's room at her window. Everyone either said no or shook their heads no. Someone had to be lying. I heard a slight thud come from upstairs in Michelle's room. I ran back upstairs, again with Michelle following me. I flicked on the lights in her room and spun around in a circle looking for someone. The sliding closet door was cracked open. I just realized. I thought I could see something through the crack. I squinted my eyes to try and see what it was. It was an eye. I screamed like a child for maybe 2 seconds, followed by Michelle. Relatives ran up into the room as I angrily slid open the closet and pulled out Sam, Tom's son. Tom ran up and found me basically holding Sam by the neck. Sam was holding some belongings of my daughter that I'd rather not talk about. This incident definitely scarred, maybe even ruined my friendship with Tom and his wife, and it's made me that much more protective over my daughter.
I'll get right to the point. My middle son is a senior in college. He's a good kid, most of the time. I'm a bit cross with him right now, because he just asked me for money for a spring break trip to Hawaii with his friends, which kind of caught me off guard. Like I said, he's a good kid, and I want him to enjoy himself, but something about the way he asked rubbed me the wrong way. His mother's been struggling with her mental health lately, and it would have meant a lot to her to have him around. But I guess he's more preoccupied with getting wasted on a beach with his frat brothers. I can't even say I blame him for it. I was exactly the same when I was his age, and I see a lot of myself in that kid. The whole thing actually got me reminiscing about my own college days and reminded me about something I haven't thought about in a very long time, which is the story I'm about to tell. Funnily enough, my son is the one who introduced me to this page, so maybe he'll get a kick out of this if it gets read. I went to Wharton, class of '85. Something I'm still damn proud of. It was and still is the most prestigious business school in the world, and I took that reputation seriously. I had my fun, but I also worked like hell. It was a different time back then. A lot of my classmates were crazy, like Wolf of Wall Street crazy, and I did my best to avoid getting swept up into that life. My junior year, though, I did something a little impulsive. I was dating a Puerto Rican girl named Maria Munez, who I remember fondly. Sometimes I try to imagine how different my life would have been if I had chosen to take things further with various girlfriends I had, her being one of them. Instead of going home for spring break like I usually did, Maria convinced me to come home to Puerto Rico to meet her extended family. It was my first time on the island and I was eager to impress her, so I agreed without hesitation. That being said, I was a nervous wreck. I didn't want to mess anything up, and Maria often joked about how open Puerto Rican families were, so I was aware that they already knew a lot about me. It turned out that my anxiety was mostly unjustified, as I got along really well with everyone upon meeting them, and it seemed like they really liked me. Most of the trip was about meeting her relatives, but we did have time for a few outings of our own. I mean, it was spring break after all. One of those outings was a hike through El Janqué, which, fun fact, is the only tropical rainforest in the US National Forest System. Neither of us had a car, obviously, so Maria's mother drove us and dropped us off at one of the most popular trailheads. The two of us were pretty devious, so we definitely took advantage of the fact that neither of us had to drive. The plan was to hike, enjoy the scenery, and sneak a little rum we'd packed. Everything was lining up to be perfect, but we quickly realized there was a big problem. The trail we were most excited about was closed. I don't remember why, flooding, maintenance, something like that. But all I remember was that Maria was really upset. I tried to calm her down and told her we could just hike one of the many other trails the forest had to offer. She wasn't budging though, and told me that the trail we planned on hiking was like the premier trail, and the other ones didn't even come close. How one hiking trail could be astronomically better than the other, I really couldn't tell you. She was adamant though, and I had long since learned the dangers of arguing with her over something like this. So I asked her what she wanted to do instead, and she told me we should just hike the closed trail anyway. Like I said, I was kind of rebellious back then, and so was she. So when she proposed that idea, I was on board. We'd come all this way, and now some rule was going to stop us? No chance. She gave me a look, and that was all it took. We made sure there was no one around, slipped past the barriers, and started up the trail, laughing like a couple of idiots. At first, it was exactly what we wanted. Better even. It felt like we had the whole forest to ourselves, which was especially awesome given how popular this trail would have been otherwise. Imagine visiting a world-famous natural site, except you're the only one there. That kind of exclusivity is impossible to come by. Anyway, we hiked for a decent while, passing little waterfalls and admiring the beauty of the forest. And yes, we were also drinking. Not excessively, but just enough to feel a good buzz. It was really fun, I have to be honest. But then, out of nowhere, Maria screamed and jumped back, almost knocking me over. That instantly put me on high alert, although I didn't know what had scared her. I looked around frantically until I saw it. A little further down the path was what looked like a freshly decapitated mongoose. Let me repeat that, it was a mongoose. A big one too, and its head looked like it was completely missing. I told Maria to stay where she was and approached the carcass by myself, hoping it was maybe a stuffed animal or something. It wasn't. I inspected it without getting too close, and confirmed what I initially thought. Its head was cleanly sliced off. The cut was too precise for it to have been anything other than a knife wound, which was downright disturbing. The worst part though was that the body hadn't started smelling yet, meaning it probably hadn't been there for very long. Maria was shaking. I was mostly shocked by it. I tried to reassure her by saying something dumb like how crime in a national forest was unlikely, even though I couldn't explain it myself. I put my arm around her and ushered her past the body, trying to block it from the line of sight. All I could think about in that moment was putting some serious distance between us and that poor lifeless creature. We walked in silence for a while, and even though we distanced ourselves from the mongoose, I could tell the moment was gone. The adrenaline rush had worn off my buzz and erased my good mood. As bad as I felt though, I could tell that Maria was significantly more shaken, and I couldn't imagine that she was even enjoying herself in the slightest. She said that she wanted to stick to our original plan of hiking the whole trail to the other side, but it was obvious that she didn't want to be in that forest anymore, and I couldn't blame her. As we were walking, I couldn't help but rack my brain trying to figure out what we had stumbled upon. It didn't make any sense. I wasn't aware of the hunting laws there, but I couldn't imagine that hunting in a national forest so close to a pedestrian trail could be legal. And yet, that was the only explanation I could think of. Why they had left that mongoose's body there to rot was beyond me, but there was no other rational explanation. Maybe it was a hunter who had seized upon the opportunity to have that part of the forest all to himself, like we had. I really didn't know. Maria and I hiked another mile or so, with me trying to cheer her up the whole time. but nothing was working. Eventually, she admitted that she wasn't feeling well and wanted to turn back. I didn't argue, although I was definitely dreading having to walk past that spot again, mostly because I wasn't sure how it was going to affect her, and I just wanted her to feel comfortable. We retraced our steps, and I could tell we were closing in on the spot where the mongoose had been. I told Maria to keep her head down so she wouldn't see, and she did. I braced myself as we turned the final bend, but when the spot came into view, the mongoose was no longer there. Someone had moved it. My heartbeat started racing, and I instantly began scanning nearby trees, terrified that there was someone hiding among them. I was not prepared for what came next. Instead of seeing a person, I noticed something hanging from one of the trees. It was a mongoose. It was strung up with twine, its paws tied together. There was a sickly green liquid dripping from its body that hadn't been there before, and it was rotating slowly in the wind. I couldn't help but curse out loud when I saw it, which caused Maria to open her eyes. As soon as she saw it, she let out an awful, blood-curdling scream of pure terror. Before she could freeze up, I grabbed her wrist and told her to run. We took off sprinting down the trail, trying not to trip over each other. I let her go in front of me and kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be following us. Instead, a deafening scream rang out from somewhere behind us. It was a woman's scream, and it was absolutely terrifying. It sounded like the kind of scream someone getting attacked would make. I felt Maria's body jolt mid-stride, and for a second, I thought she was going to collapse. She let out this panicked sob and tried to push herself even harder, but she was already out of breath. I kept my grip on her wrist, practically dragging her along as she slowed down. We couldn't stop. My own chest was burning, but we needed to keep moving. Eventually, Maria could barely run anymore, so we had no choice but to slow down to a fast walk. I turned around completely and started walking backward, keeping my eyes locked on the trail behind us. I was bracing myself for a fight. Something had strung up that mongoose. Something had caused that scream. I was 100% sure that I'd see something charging towards us any second, but nothing ever happened. The trailhead finally came into view, and for a brief second, I thought we were in the clear. But then I saw someone standing near the barricades watching us. It was a park worker with his arms crossed, clearly pissed off. As soon as we slipped past the barricades, he started yelling at us about breaking the rules and told us he was kicking us out and banning us for life. But then he got a good look at Maria, who at that point was both sobbing and physically exhausted. I told the guy everything, not leaving a single detail out. He took it really seriously. He told us we both needed to come with him, so we did. We were taken to a small ranger station near the parking lot where a supervisor was waiting. I had to go through the story again, then again when they called the police. Maria didn't say a word. Eventually, her mother arrived and we left, still shaken. I never heard anything about what the authorities found, or if they even bothered investigating. I'm sure Maria's family might have heard something, but we broke up the following summer, and we fell out of contact after that, so I really wouldn't know. I haven't thought about this experience in a long time, but it's still just as unsettling as it was all those years ago. I think the worst part about the whole thing was that scream, because we never saw anyone else on that trail, and I have no idea who it belonged to. I'd consider myself a pretty laid-back guy. I'd say the same about most of my friends. This happened last year, so I'll get right into it. Spring break was supposed to be just me and my friends Jackson, Ariel, and Isabel camping on a secluded beach in Alabama. No crowds, just stars and waves. We got there late, later than we planned. We parked in the closest lot and began walking toward the beach. The place was dead quiet. No other campers, no fishermen, nothing but empty sand stretching for miles. According to Isabel, who was familiar with the area, locals sometimes use that part of the beach for overnight fishing, but that night it was empty. It wasn't fully dark out yet, but the sun had started setting, so we'd need to set up camp quickly. Jackson and I began pitching the tents. Since I had driven, I had brought my dog Bean with me. He was a Doberman who loved the sand, so we all got a kick out of watching him run and roll around. At one point, Ariel pointed out a car in the distance, saying it had driven by twice already. I turned. An old, beat-up looking SUV slowly rolled past on the narrow access road that ran parallel to the dunes. The access road was a little more than a strip of packed sand, just wide enough for one car. On one side was the beach where we were, and the other side was a line of shrubs. You couldn't really see the main roads from where we were. The car drove by and ultimately disappeared down the road. The four of us shrugged it off and went back to setting up, and by the time we finished, we decided to crack a few beers and chop it up in a circle. The girls drank seltzers instead of beer, which we made fun of them for. It was almost fully dark at that point. I can't remember who noticed it first, but that car that had driven by was back again. Only this time, it stopped when it was parallel to us. The driver's door opened and a man got out. I could tell it was a man because he was really tall, although I couldn't make out any features of his face. He began walking towards us, and the girls got nervous. Jackson and I told them not to worry, and we got up to go intercept the man before he could reach our campsite. Bean was already on high alert, so I told him to come with us. As we got closer, I started to notice that he was walking oddly. There was this slight limp in his walk, and he almost stumbled a few times. When we got close enough, Jackson said, "How's it going, man?" trying to keep things light. The guy didn't waste any time. He immediately said, "You're on my property." He slurred his words a bit, and I figured he was a little drunk. I told him we thought the beach was public land. Keep in mind, it was really unlikely that some dude owned the beach. There were no private signs anyway. After I said that, the guy didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out a knife. Bean started growling in response to the man's body language, which honestly should have scared the guy off given how scary Dobermans look. But he didn't budge. Instead, he started running towards us with his knife outstretched. Bean charged at him and jumped to attack his arm that was holding the knife, causing him to fall to the ground. I yelled no at the top of my lungs as I didn't want my dog to get stabbed, but Bean somehow got the dude to drop the knife. The man screamed in pain as Bean bit his arm. I whistled for him to get off and he listened to me. He ran back to my side but kept his eyes on the guy who was now writhing in pain on the ground. Eventually, the guy got up and started running back towards his car. Jackson and I ran back to the girls, telling them everything. By the time we finished, that SUV had driven off. The girls wanted to pack up and carry everything back to the car, but there was a part of me that was nervous about that plan. That guy was unhinged. There was no telling what he'd do, and I wasn't keen on walking in darkness with my hands full. Isabel made a good point though, saying that he might return with a gun or something. I told Ariel to call the police and tell them where we were and what happened. Once the police were close by, the four of us started walking towards the parking lot with our stuff. Bean was on high alert, and I have to admit the only reason I felt even remotely safe was because of him. I noticed lights up ahead near my car, and I was relieved. The officer stepped out to take our statements, and I was not ready for what happened next. He quickly pointed out my car's tires were slashed, and I was horrified to find out they were. The officer unholstered his weapon and told me to unlock the car, which I did. He opened my trunk, but thank God it was a false alarm. The officer was nice enough to help me with my tire situation. Thank God we brought Bean with us that night. That guy was probably a drunken lunatic. It could have probably been a quadruple murder if he had gotten his way. Finding a nice secluded place to hang out is definitely an awesome time, but it obviously comes with its risks. It was spring break 2023. My friend Michelle and I booked a trip to Miami for a weekend. It was both of our first times in Miami. We were both 22. We stayed at some full house rental in Wynwood, which was like a 20-minute Uber from the beach. We got there on Thursday and we were staying until Monday. We landed pretty late in the day Thursday, so we just went out to some nearby bars for the first night. It was fun. The following day, we Ubered to Miami Beach to have a beach day. We brought the towels from the rental and just laid on the beach for hours. Multiple groups of guys approached us and we just reject them or whatever. But there was one guy who approached us, I guess specifically me, that just had this really charming accent, seemingly nice forward personality, and honestly everything about him was handsome, from his hair down to his physique. He introduced himself as Will. He asked what our plans for the night were and asked for my number, and honestly I gave it to him. Then he was off on his way down the beach. He didn't seem to be with anyone. We watched to see if he'd stop and try to get more numbers, but he didn't. He was just walking away looking at his phone, and eventually walked off the beach in the direction of the street. Michelle was a little jealous that he showed me more attention, I could tell. Later that day, after the beach and some bars, we left Miami Beach because it was a little too crazy for us. Definitely because it was spring break, but it was just a bit much. We returned to the rental with some drinks and snacks from a nearby store. We drank in the backyard by the pool, listening to music on Michelle's speaker while we plotted our night. It was around this time I shot Will a text asking what he was doing for the night. He responded very quickly, saying he and his friend didn't have plans yet, and then he suggested the four of us go out by us in Wynwood. Michelle jokingly asked if the friend was cute, but I wasn't going to ask that. We made a plan for Will and his friend to come pregame with us at the rental, so they came around 8. The friend's name was Ken, and he was surprisingly good looking as well. I could tell Michelle was pleasantly surprised. They brought their own drinks and left them on the counter in the kitchen, and we drank in the yard for like an hour. They seemed very normal. All seemed like it was going well. We eventually walked to a nearby bar. It was also in Wynwood. I have to admit, Michelle and I were already drunk, and Ken and Will kept buying rounds of shots. Things became a blur pretty quickly. I wouldn't say I blacked out, but bits and pieces of my memory became foggy at that point. Eventually, Michelle and Ken went to another side of the bar, presumably to hook up, so I was alone with Will for quite some time. Eventually, I had to go to the bathroom, but before I left, I remember him calling out, "What do I want for my next drink?" I replied back, "A tequila soda." When I came back out from the bathroom, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Will was like hovering over the corner of the bar, clearly doing something sketchy. I walked a certain direction to get a better angle, and I saw he had the 2 drinks in front of him, but he was hovered over them as if he were doing something to my drink. I may have been drunk, but that was enough for my intuition to tell me to leave. I walked away without him noticing to the other side of the bar, looking for Michelle, but she and Ken were gone apparently. So I rushed out of the bar and tried calling her a bunch of times, but she never picked up. Around this time, Will texted me asking where I went. I ignored it. I texted Michelle a bunch of times, asking what happened, where is she? And then I eventually dropped the bomb that I think Will was trying to roofie me and that we should get away from these guys. I started walking back to the Airbnb. This was when Michelle texted back, asking, "Why do you think he was roofieing you?" And I said because he was hovering over the drink he ordered for me, doing something to it. She texted back, maybe he was just on his phone. I tried calling her, but again, she didn't pick up. She texted back instead, saying, "I'm still with Ken, just text." I responded to her that I already left, so I'm not going back anyway, and I suggested she meet me at the Airbnb. She responded, "I'll be back soon." So I walked back. When I got back, I let myself in with the code lock. The door automatically locked after like 10 seconds. Same thing with the back door. I sat, really drunk and by myself, honestly worried about Michelle, but also I feel like I was wondering if I was just overthinking the whole roofies thing. Maybe he was just on his phone. Either way, it was too late now. I was surprised that Will never attempted to text or call me again. Next thing I remember was the doorknob to the back door jiggling, and then I heard the button sound effects of the code lock, followed by a failed attempt sound effect. I then got a text from Michelle saying to open the back door. I went to the back door and called Michelle's name through the door. She didn't answer though. So I tried calling her phone, but she didn't pick up. I got a text back saying, "Hurry, open the door, he's coming." And this was when I really started to freak out. I yelled through the door, "Michelle, you're scaring me." There was no peephole or windows to look through to see if it was really her. I begged her to please answer me. She never did. There was a peephole in the front door, so I hurried to the front and looked through it. I actually felt sick at this moment, scared for my life, because I saw what looked like Will hiding to the side of the front door. A million thoughts crossed my mind. like if Michelle was running from Will. I was still too terrified to open the back door without her confirming it was her. I texted her back that I'm calling 911 right now. She didn't respond. I actually did call 911 and explained, and while I was on the phone, I checked the peephole again, and Will was gone. When police showed up, I let them in, and within 5 minutes, one of them asked if my friend was blonde, and I said yes. He then told me that another officer had her in their squad car and was bringing her here. I was so relieved, but also horrified. When she arrived in a second police car, she had been visibly crying. She was very, very drunk. To the best of her ability, she explained that she had her phone stolen and she was lost wandering the streets for an hour until someone helped her call the police. All of the texts I got from her number were never her. It was that guy she was with, Ken, or whatever his real name was. We also found her phone thrown in the pool in the backyard. They clearly took off the second I mentioned the police. We had to make a police report giving every last detail as specifically as possible. They said they'd get the surveillance footage from the bar we went to. We also had to contact the Airbnb host and immediately cancel our stay and go somewhere else. It was a long, nightmarish night. Obviously, the rest of our trip was completely spoiled. It took a whole week before hearing back anything from the police, and the only reason they called was to confirm what the name that guy that I was texting gave me, because it didn't align with the phone records for that number, which I'd already figured out myself. He was using another stolen phone. After that, I never heard from the police again, which is absolutely sickening how little priority the police put into cases like this, even with easy evidence. I have no interest in returning to Miami after this horrible experience. I could have honestly been killed. My name is Anna. My friend Lena and I had been looking forward to spring break for weeks. We were two broke college juniors desperate for a change of scenery, but neither of us could afford the classic trip to Mexico or Hawaii, so we were kind of restricted to somewhere in the continental US, preferably not too far away. So when we found a cheap Airbnb near Charleston's historic district, we booked it immediately. 5 nights of food, bars, and exploring. It felt like exactly what we needed. Plus, it was my first spring break above the age of 21, so I wouldn't have to constantly stress about which places were likely to snatch my fake ID. By the 3rd night, we'd settled into a routine. Sightseeing during the day, hopping between restaurants and bars in the evening. I'm not a heavy drinker, and neither is Lena, so we were getting more enjoyment out of just experiencing what the city had to offer. Early that evening, we ended up at this tiny seafood spot we had found online. Fried shrimp, hush puppies, sweet tea, you know, that sort of vibe. The place honestly felt like a hidden gem, and I was impressed that Lena had been able to sift through all the touristy stuff to find something a bit more authentic. The good vibe didn't last though. We were halfway through our late lunch when my phone buzzed. I glanced down. It was a number I didn't recognize. The message just said, "Hey." I stared at it for a few seconds before showing Lena, asking her if she knew the number. She looked at my phone and said she didn't. I figured it was just a scam or something, but usually those scam texts say more than just "hey." Maybe it was a wrong number. I typed back a quick "who is this?" and went back to eating. Lena and I were laughing about something silly when another text from that same number popped up on my phone. It said, "Look outside." That one made me pause. I glanced toward the window next to our table, expecting to see someone waving or messing with me. Maybe one of my friends from school had coincidentally taken a trip to Charleston at the same time we had. But there was nothing, just the street with people walking by like normal. I told Lena someone was messing with me, and she agreed, saying it was probably just a prank. I laughed, but the thought of that really creeped me out. None of my friends were really the type to do that, but I guessed it could have been some guy who had previously hit on me and was bored or something. Up until that point, the whole thing still felt harmless, but then another message came through, just a few minutes later. It said one word, Anna. That stopped me cold. If this person knew my name, it definitely wasn't a wrong number. Probably not a scam either. I gasped and showed Lena, and she reminded me about something I had completely forgotten about. On our first day in Charleston, Lena and I had entered one of those giveaways at a local cafe. It was one of those win a free meal promotions where they ask for your name and number and a few other things. It had completely slipped my mind, but as soon as Lena brought it up, that's all I could think about. I hadn't given my number to anyone in Charleston either, so it made sense. I told Lena whoever was texting me probably had her number as well, and the two of us kind of freaked each other out. Dinner wasn't as fun after that. In all honesty, I felt too out in the open. We paid the bill and decided to shake it off at a rooftop bar across town. It was packed and seemed like the type of place that attracted a younger crowd, so it was a no-brainer. After a few drinks, I was starting to loosen up, and Lena and I were enjoying ourselves again. But of course, that didn't last long. I got another message from that number, but this one was so much worse. It said, "That's a nice red jacket." I went stiff. I was wearing a red jacket. In fact, I was one of the only people there who was even wearing red. I looked around frantically, but it was useless. The place was crowded, filled with people laughing and drinking, but no one was looking at me. At least, not obviously. I showed Lena the message, and she said we should leave. The two of us started making our way back to the Airbnb as cautiously as possible. I kept glancing around behind us to make sure we weren't being followed, and we weren't. By the time we got inside, I bolted the door and double-checked every lock. We shut the curtains and locked all the windows too, trying to convince ourselves we were just overreacting. But an hour after we got back to the Airbnb, we started getting hungry, but neither of us wanted to leave. We ordered Uber Eats instead, picking some random burger place a few blocks away. I always had my Uber Eats setting set to leave at door by default, as I had a really bad experience with a delivery driver a while back that I don't want to talk about. The estimated wait time was 50 minutes, which felt like forever. We distracted ourselves by watching some dumb reality show, trying to shake off the lingering paranoia from earlier. For a little while, it worked. Eventually, there was a knock at the door. I looked down at my phone and saw a notification from Uber Eats saying the driver was arriving. I was confused though. Normally, Uber Eats would send a photo when the food was dropped off, so I wasn't too sure why our driver had knocked on the door. I looked at Lena, and she looked equally confused. I got up and checked the peephole, and yeah, it was a random, bulky-looking dude in a hoodie holding our bag of food. He just looked like a normal Uber Eats driver. I watched for a few moments, expecting him to set our food down and leave, but he just stood there. After a while, he knocked on the door again and said out loud, "Uber Eats for Anna." I said thank you and that he could just leave it out there, but he still didn't move. There was a long pause, and then he finally said I needed to come out and sign something real quick. That wasn't right. I exchanged a knowing glance with Lena. Something was very wrong about this. She immediately pulled out her phone and dialed 911, mouthing, "just in case," to me. I wasn't gonna argue. Looking back, speaking out loud to that guy probably wasn't a smart choice, because after that, he started knocking on the door more aggressively. He kept saying that he had other deliveries to make and that he just needed a quick signature, but I knew that was BS. When I didn't respond, he started jiggling the doorknob. When it didn't budge, he started banging on the door, shouting my name. I honestly thought he was going to kick the door down, and I don't think Lena and I would have been able to fend him off had he done so. But then I heard a siren in the distance, and the banging on the door stopped. I heard the bag of food fall to the porch, followed by rapid footsteps running away from the house. There was quite the commotion on our yard. We heard officers yelling and sirens blaring. Lena and I rushed to one of the windows just in time to see two officers tackling that guy in the hoodie a few houses over. We didn't dare go outside, but we watched as they put him in cuffs and escorted him to the back of one of their cars. The officers then came to our house and we told them everything, including the texts I had been receiving. By some miracle, one of the officers had been patrolling just 2 blocks from our Airbnb when Lena placed the call, which explained how they showed up so quickly. Thankfully, we were in a very happening area. They took our statements and told us we'd be hearing from them soon. It turned out our cafe theory was spot on. He worked there, He had taken photos of the giveaway forms and had been following us since that afternoon, probably because we had written down that we were just visiting for spring break, and that made us easy targets or something. The cops' running theory was that he had followed us home from the bar and waited outside our house. When the Uber Eats driver pulled up, he must have convinced him to hand over the food, maybe pretending to be my boyfriend or something. The guy also apparently had a criminal record, which made the situation even worse. We were dealing with someone with a very violent history, and that was downright terrifying. The rest of the trip kind of sucked, and when it got time to leave Charleston, I was relieved. I still don't know what that guy's plan was. Maybe he thought if we opened the door, he could push his way in and do God knows what. Either way, I try not to think about what would have happened if Lena hadn't called the police when she did, or even worse, if the police hadn't been able to get there in time. When I was 22, I got a job in New York City. Living in Jersey, however, there was no way I'd be able to do that commute daily, so moving was a necessity. Only thing, I didn't have a lot of money yet, so when I saw an ad on Craigslist for an available bedroom in an apartment in the Hell's Kitchen area for a really low price, I jumped on it. I took a ride to the city the next day to view the apartment, and the landlord gave me a quick tour of the place. The landlord himself seemed a bit socially awkward, but that didn't really matter at all. The place did come with a catch. I'd have a roommate. The landlord said he's a very quiet, to himself kind of person, which he said was good. My roommate's name would be Bren. The landlord knocked on Bren's door asking if he'd like to come out and say hello. Bren didn't even answer. The landlord suggested he might be taking a nap. So we moved on to talking in the living room, where I said I was interested in renting. I signed an application, and the next day, the landlord called and offered me the room. So I moved in the next week. My dad helped me unload all my furniture into my little room. Something odd to note was that never once did this Bren character come out during all this commotion to at least say hi. He was definitely home. We heard him moving around in his room. I came to the early realization that he probably wasn't going to be friendly at all. When we finished unloading the van, my dad left and I was alone, officially moved out. I sat in my bed and started watching Netflix on my laptop. Then I heard the door to Bren's room open and close. This seemed like my chance to go out and say hi. It was his first time leaving his room. I got out of my bed, but before I could even get to my bedroom door, the front door to the apartment slammed shut. I stepped outside to the living room, and no one was there. I didn't know what the deal with this Bren guy was, but surely he had to know we'd have to meet eventually. I went back to my room, ate a bowl of ramen, and went to sleep. I woke up when I heard the front door to the apartment close again. Then footsteps followed. The footsteps on the creaky wood floor made their way to the outside of my door, then stopped. I sat up and looked at the crack below the door. The outlines of feet could be seen through the light creeping in under the door. Why was he just standing out there like a creep? Of course, I didn't say anything. I just waited for him to walk away. I didn't have my door locked, and I was low-key terrified of him entering my room. But thankfully, he walked away from my door and back to his room, and I heard him shut his door. I tried to go to sleep, but all night all I heard were thumps coming from his room. I had no idea what he could possibly be doing. I was tempted to go knock on his door and tell him to keep it down, but I hadn't even met the guy yet, so I had to deal with it. Eventually I fell asleep, and when I woke up in the morning, it seemed Bren was out already, maybe at work. I didn't know at the time. I spent most of that day shopping for groceries and basic apartment necessities. When I got back, I dropped all the bags on the couch in the living room to give myself a rest. I cooked dinner, watched some Netflix on the couch. All the while, Bren never came home. I did a quick run to the nearby 7-Eleven to get toothpaste, and when I got back, I noticed Bren's door was cracked open and the light was on. So I figured this was it, the moment for me to say hello. I went to his door, knocked lightly twice, then pushed the door open. What I found in there was shocking. Or maybe I should say what I didn't find in there. The room was completely empty. Not a single piece of furniture, except for a single chair sitting in the corner of the room. A kind of chair you'd find in a high school classroom. My heart suddenly started racing and I started to shake. I turned off the light in that room and shut the door. Could this Bren person have been in the process of moving out? I went to my room, locked the door, and sat on my bed, suddenly getting a really bad headache. I took out my phone and decided to call the landlord to ask him what the hell was going on. After dialing his number, I put the phone to my ear and suddenly heard a loud ringing sound coming from my closet. I felt like my heart, which was already racing, was now in my stomach. The phone rang twice, then went to voicemail. I got out from the bed, ready to open the closet, but I stopped and realized that given that the phone rang twice, that means he had his phone and he declined the call. I had the sick realization that the landlord was likely in my closet, and there never even was a Bren. I ran to the bathroom, locked myself in, and called the cops. They got to the apartment shortly and searched the whole apartment with me. Sure enough, we found the landlord hiding under my bed. I tried pressing charges for trespassing, trying to get myself out of the lease, but it turned out there never even was a lease. The dude wasn't even an actual landlord. He didn't even own the apartment. I didn't get the rest of the story, like how he got the keys in the first place. I had my dad come the next day to help me move all my stuff back home. I found another apartment the next week, and it was a huge hassle going through the whole moving process again. I knew from the start the so-called landlord gave off bad vibes, but who would have ever imagined the events that were about to take place? There was an ad on Zillow for a shared apartment near the chicken farm I worked at. I moved in because it was convenient and already furnished. I just dropped off my clothes and a mini dresser, and I already had a bed to sleep in the spare room. The man who was renting the room out to me was old. He was like 70 or something, and his name was Ben. It was a non-contractual agreement, meaning I'd pay him by the week, but he was more or less still a roommate. He was very old-fashioned, and that included everything in the house. I've never exactly come from a wealthy family, so trust me when I say this was a steal for me. One night after getting home from a long day of work, I collapsed into bed and fell asleep like a baby. But suddenly, I awoke to the bedroom door opening. Light poured into the room from the hallway, and standing in the doorway was the old man, Ben, with his hand on the doorknob. He said in his deep, hoarse voice, "Stay out of the basement." He said he knew I went down there. I defended myself and assured him I didn't, because I actually didn't. He shut the door, and I heard him walk downstairs. I sat there thinking this guy must be unstable or something. The next day, I was off from work. Ben took his old jalopy down the road. I'm guessing to the store. While I was alone, I stared at the basement door. I knew it was the basement door because I'd seen him go down there before. I went to open it just to peek downstairs, but obviously it was pitch black down there. I would have never been compelled to go down there if it weren't for his bizarre remark about not going down there. But I figured he wasn't going to be home anytime soon, so I continued down. I found the light switch at the bottom step for some reason. It was for the most part a normal basement so far, but there was a door in the corner. Behind that door was something unimaginable. The door was very hard to open because there was some rubber concealer under the door. I'm guessing to keep that awful smell out of the rest of the basement and house. The inside of this little room was a nightmare. Bloodstains on the concrete floor, black bags stacked in the corner of the room, stretched long enough to be carrying bodies or body parts. And the smell of rotting life. I had to refrain from puking right there. I noticed a camera hung in the top right corner of the room, aimed down at some workbench. I took a quick picture of the room and hurried out of there. I went up to the spare bedroom, packed all of my clothes in a garbage bag, and heard the front door slam shut downstairs. He was back. I played it cool and greeted him from the upstairs hallway. He didn't respond. I heard him open the basement door and stomp downstairs. I saw that as my cue to sprint to my car. I made it to my car and without looking back, drove away from there. I drove 15 miles back to my brother's farm and showed him the picture. He said I was an idiot for not calling the sheriff sooner. So I called 911 and told them to bring a search warrant to Ben's address and check the basement before he could clear it out. I made it clear I was simply his temporary roommate or tenant living with him and came across it. A few hours later, someone from the sheriff's department came to my brother's farm asking for my ID and some other information. I complied with them. They gave me the relieving news that Ben had been arrested. He was in the process of clearing any evidence from his basement, but he wasn't quick enough. The deputies didn't go into much detail about what exactly they found in those bags or anything else, but I don't think they were allowed to. They thanked me and went on their way. My brother let me stay with him for a few weeks till I was ready to get back out there and find another apartment. I'm not sure how many of you went to college, but for those of you who did, you most likely remember that feeling of walking into your dorm for the first time, meeting your roommate, the person you're supposed to ideally be friends with for the next 4 years. I certainly remember mine. I walked into my dorm for the first time, and there was my roommate. He had fair skin, black hair, glasses, and a slightly feminine tone in his voice. There was nothing wrong with any of that, but to me, he just immediately struck me as the gaming type, which was not exactly someone who I was going to vibe with easily. From the moment I shook his hand and he gave me a dead fish handshake, I was a little put off. I'll call him John for the purpose of this story. I left the room to go say hi to the other kids on the floor and meet as many people as possible. I instantly vibed with some of the other kids more than I did with John. Anyway, that first night consisted of a lot of unpacking and hanging around in the room. So I did try to get to know John a little bit. It wasn't that he was a mean person, it was just he didn't seem to really know how to converse. I would ask him questions about himself, and he'd give me one-word responses, or responses that barely even made sense. He even went to bed really early, shutting off his lamp at like 10 o'clock. No one had classes the next day, so I just found it odd. I put headphones in and watched videos on my phone until around 12. Then I went to sleep. The next morning, a few of the guys on my floor and I went to the dining hall together. When I got back to my room, I noticed my duffel bag was moved. I looked at John, who was sitting on his bed, then went to go through my bag to see if anything was missing. I couldn't find what it was, but my bag just seemed lighter. I straight up accused John of going through my bag, and he denied it with a very aggressive tone. What could I do though? I didn't have cameras in the room, so I couldn't prove it. The next night, I tried inviting John out with me and a couple of the other kids from the floor. He didn't want to go, claiming he was trying to stay on top of his work as soon as possible. So I went out, and when I got back, John was fast asleep. It was kind of late, so I just went straight to bed too. It started to rain pretty heavy outside. A storm was in the forecast. I woke up in the middle of the night hearing thunder crashing. I was too comfortable and lazy to roll over and look outside, but even with my eyes closed, I was noticing the constant flashing from the lightning. If anything, it actually helped put me back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up, and my backpack was open and moved. I didn't accuse John this time. I decided I was going to stay up that night and wait, listen to what he was doing. So, after a long rainy day, night came, as did the time for me to hit the hay. I stayed on my phone for a long time, listening to the rain outside the window. Around 1 or 2 a.m., I flipped on my side and pretended to be asleep. I did this for a long time, and eventually I started noticing the flashes again. 2 or 3, actually. I turned to my other side and saw John sitting upright in his bed. I only caught a glimpse of him quickly putting down his arms as I flipped over. Suddenly all those flashes made sense. It wasn't lightning, it was him taking pictures of me. I played dumb and said, "What are you doing?" He stuttered and said he couldn't sleep. The next day, I told the other kids on the floor about it and how weird John was overall. They said I should request a room change. I agreed with them. At whatever point I went back to the room, John was actually gone for once. I couldn't believe it. His laptop was also on his bed with the lid cracked open. I had to snoop. I was too curious. I opened the laptop, and I was on John's desktop, which was littered full of folders, programs, and images. It was the messiest desktop I've ever seen. I started opening the random pictures on his desktop. Most of them were weird, but then I got to the disturbing ones. Pictures of me. Upon opening one of them, I realized it was a picture of me in bed, taken with an iPhone with a flash. He had stored all the pictures he'd taken of me on his computer. He even had pictures of my duffel bag and the inside of my backpack. I took a video of the laptop screen, then deleted every picture I could find from his computer and closed his laptop. I went straight to the hall that dealt with dorm life and showed them the video. I requested a new roommate immediately. I don't know how John was disciplined by the school, but I was going to be given a new room across campus the next day. However, on my last night with John, I couldn't sleep at all. I heard the springs under his mattress kinking as he got up from his bed at some odd hour in the night. Then silence. Silence until I heard a short, quiet exhale come from right above my bed. He was standing over my bed, I just knew it. But I was just simply too afraid to turn around. Less than a minute later, I heard the springs under his mattress again, and the rest of the night was silence. I was out first thing in the morning. My new roommate was like a breath of fresh air, a normal guy. It's a little creepy knowing that John Kid still has all those pictures of me sleeping on his phone. I don't know what his goal with those pictures were. I don't know why he just stood over my bed like that the last night I was there. I don't know why he went through my bags. The kid was an insane creep, and I'm happy I got away from him. When I moved out from home, my dad's friend Kathy was subletting her apartment with 2 bedrooms. She said she'd give me a good deal, however I'd have to share it with some older woman she found. She was tight on money, so I understood. Kathy introduced the woman and I the day I moved in. Her name was Betty. She was like 60 years old. It felt weird knowing I'd have a roommate who could almost be my grandma. Since Kathy was subletting the apartment, it already had furniture. I just had to bring my own bed and dresser. The weirdness started on the second night. I was watching TV in the living room when Betty's head appeared from behind the wall to the hallway, and she stared at me intently. She started muttering these strange, faint noises. "Betty, you okay?" I asked. She groaned and disappeared back into the hallway. I immediately got on the phone with Kathy and asked if there was something wrong with Betty. Kathy said there was nothing wrong with her as far as she knew, though she only met her a week ago. When I told her about what Kathy just did, she was surprised. The next day I ran into Kathy cooking eggs in the kitchen. She said good morning, and I asked her if she was okay last night. She seemed confused what I was referring to, and I mentioned the way she was staring at me and making those noises. She claimed she had no recollection of it. All I could chalk it up to in my head was some kind of psychotic break. Fast forwarding through normal, unnecessary fluff, I was laying in my bed on my laptop with the light off. There was a knock at my bedroom door. I muted my laptop and heard the same moaning and groaning sounds of Betty from the night before. Quite frankly, I was uncomfortable with going out there, but this confirmed that something was definitely wrong with this woman. She kept knocking. It wouldn't stop. But the door was unlocked. If something was really wrong, I figured she'd come in. I really think the knocking and moaning went on for a full minute before I heard her walk away. It seemed these little episodes of hers would only happen at night. I almost wanted to be able to lock the door because it was kind of creepy actually, but the door had no lock. But she left, so I was okay to go to sleep now. I woke up expecting it to be like 9 a.m., but it was pitch black. I looked at my clock and it was 1:30 a.m. What I was woken up by became clear when there was a creak in the floor in the room. I saw a figure standing at the edge of my bed in the dark. "Becky?" I said. I heard the familiar groaning sounds again. I flipped on the lamp next to my bed, and there she was. This 60-something-year-old woman, with her long graying hair all disheveled, looking like a half-awake psycho. But really, the first thing I noticed was the large knife in her hand. I screamed a horrific scream as I curled up in the corner of my bed, expecting her to attack or do something. But she just kept making her strange sounds. Then she left the room. I ran to shut the door and block it with the dresser. I tried calling Kathy, but she was obviously asleep. I had to make it through the night, and it was a long 6 hours before the sun came up. I called Kathy at 8 and explained everything, and then I told her she needed to evict Betty immediately. She couldn't believe it, but she still apologized and said she'd be over that day. Kathy came to speak to Betty. She couldn't just evict her right away without a notice though, and the eviction process takes months. So Kathy told me it was best if I just left the apartment and found somewhere else to live while she dealt with Betty. Betty apologized and said she had no recollection of any of this stuff happening. After Kathy and I did some research, we determined Betty most likely had a severe case of sundowning syndrome, which causes people to become confused or aggressive late in the day when the sun goes down. It's really terrifying knowing in whatever confused state of mind she was in, she likely had the intention of coming into my room and stabbing me for whatever reason. Not to get too deep into backstory, nor disclose too much personal information about myself, but I'll just come right out and say it, that I've always been a reclusive person, ever since I was a young kid. I didn't have many friends at all, and I spent most of my time playing video games on the computer, or varying consoles I grew up with. As I got older, like high school, I started to get into just going on long walks exploring. I'd walk through the woods, walk through cemeteries, and then I developed an obsession with trespassing, going places I wasn't supposed to be. It started with sneaking into cemeteries at night, then I started getting more experimental with it, like exploring abandoned hospitals and schools. When I was finally able to drive, it made accessing all these places much easier, of course. I only went with one of my few friends once or twice. Honestly, I enjoyed it more by myself. Part of my weirdness includes the fact that I don't get scared exploring abandoned places at night by myself. Or perhaps I should use past tense and say, I didn't used to get scared. How I used to find a lot of abandoned structures was simpler than you might think. I would just go on Google Earth and zoom into rural areas. Then I would look for abandoned-looking structures in unsuspecting places. I would then make a list of 5 to 10 locations of these structures and try to visit them all in one day. Sometimes they wouldn't be abandoned at all, but I eventually got pretty good at gauging which ones would be. This hobby involved a lot of walking through woods, and yes, before you ask, I did have a job. I worked a minimum wage job as a stock boy at a supermarket, so when I wasn't doing that or in school, a lot of time I was doing this. One of the places on my list one day turned out to be an abandoned little church. I had to park on a dirt road and get out of my car to walk. It was about a 10-minute walk. I'd always wear jeans and boots so that I travel faster through the woods without hurting myself. I started noticing old, rusted garbage cans and other junk scattered in the woods, indicating I must have been close. And then I saw the clearing in the distance approaching, along with the structure. And there it was, some dilapidated old church sitting in a random clearing in the woods. It had an old well right in front of the building. I walked over to it to see if it had been sealed, but surprisingly it hadn't been. I looked down, and it was so deep that it was pitch black down there. When I stopped and listened though, I heard something down there. It was a faint clicking sound. It happens like on a rhythm, 1 click after 2 seconds. It didn't sound like water droplets. The best I could describe it is a stick being tapped on a stone wall. Curious, I stared down for longer than I probably should have, kind of like I was hypnotized by the sound. But eventually, I broke out of my daze and decided to go inside the church. I stepped onto the creaking wood porch, and the rotted boards gave slightly under my weight. The large double doors were ajar, not surprising. Out of all the abandoned structures I'd visited, unless it was a very well-known one posted frequently in subreddits, there wouldn't really be anyone boarding these places up. I pushed one door open further, which led to a loud groan that echoed through the trees. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of old wood. Light poured through the shattered, stained glass windows. Some of the pews were overturned or missing entirely. The pulpit stood crooked at the front, and behind it, an arched doorway led further into darkness. I did the usual, scanned the inside with my flashlight and took a few pictures from my archive on my digital camera. There was an eerie beauty to the decay, a holy place like a church in near ruin. It was beautiful but tragic. I walked slowly toward the back of the church where the arched doorway was. I stepped through it and found a narrow hallway that led to what looked like old storage rooms. One door was missing entirely, and the others were splintered or hanging off their hinges. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling everywhere, and then I saw at the end of the hallway was a stairway leading down into the basement. Jackpot, I thought. Like I said, I used to not let anything scare me. Nothing within reason, at least. Something about exploring abandoned basements excited me, but this time, something about that basement door hanging open leading to the darkness below made me pause. I honest to God got a slight chill, but I kept going. I started down the stairs slowly, and each step creaked so loud that I feared I'd fall through the wood. And then, I counted 7 steps until my right foot landed on one that gave way with a loud crack, and before I could react, it collapsed under me. I fell hard and landed in a pile of junk and dirt below the stairs. I fell directly on my ass and hurt my tailbone. I let out some kind of audible complaint, probably a "God damn it" or something. My flashlight flew out of my hand, so I crawled over to grab it. That was when I heard a voice. It was a higher-pitched sounding voice, either a woman or a young boy. It was saying words, but I couldn't understand any of them except for one thing. They said hello. The rest was gibberish, like someone trying to talk but didn't know how. I stood up and pointed the flashlight around. It was just an old basement. Some busted furniture, mostly cots, a dirt floor, stone walls. But then I saw a tunnel in the wall. It looked like it was dug out by hand. As I approached it, I realized the voice was coming from down there. I started walking toward it. I was being dumb, but I had to know what it was. I stepped just a couple of steps inside the tunnel and looked around. The walls were rough, not smooth. It had definitely been dug out with a shovel by hand. My flashlight started flickering, and I nearly had a heart attack. I hit it a few times, and it stayed on. Doing so made a louder noise than I anticipated, though. The voice got louder, still just gibberish with that same weird tone, but I could now confirm it was coming from deeper inside this tunnel. And then it stopped. Everything was quiet for a few seconds. Then I heard a click. 2 seconds later, another click. Same rhythm and sound as the well, and the sound echoed. These clicks and the gibberish echoing voice were getting louder. My heart was now in my throat, so I turned and ran back. I reached the stairs and remembered one of the steps was broken. I found it easier to grab the sides of the stairs and pull myself up, instead of trying to hop over the broken step. My flashlight dropped, but it didn't matter. I was leaving the basement back to the light of the upstairs. I got to the top and didn't look back. I ran through the hallway, through the main room, and out the front doors. I ran past the well and stopped for a second. The clicking sound was gone. There was no noise at all. Come to think of it, it was dead silence. I didn't even hear any birds. I looked down the well one more time. Still pitch blackness. With that, I turned and ran through the woods, making it to my car much faster than I made it to the church, albeit completely out of breath. I cut the day short and didn't explore the other places on my list. This was just one of those experiences where you don't know what to think, and you just drive home in silence with the music off. I didn't give up my hobby of exploring entirely, but I took a break. I was admittedly very spooked. I hope it was just some other kids exploring in there trying to mess with people. But I don't know. When I think about it, that sounds really unlikely. This happened to me a while ago and is still stuck in my mind. Me and my friends often like to be in the outdoors. I'll refer to my friends as John and Anthony. We were bored and decided to go fishing deep in the woods near some farmland. We were chased out by a farmer and his dog. We tried to hide, but his dog found us and he threatened to call the police, even though he was already on the phone with his friend, which we found weird. Honestly, we kind of found it funny. So for whatever reason, we thought it would be a good idea to go back the next day and sneak onto the property to explore it. It was nearing about an hour before dark, and this property was huge, acres upon acres. We had to hike through some deep woods, similar to the one we had been fishing in before. Although we scoped it out on Google Maps, it was still easy to get lost. I remember thinking to myself that we should be out of there before dark. At first, everything seemed normal, and I wasn't getting any bad gut feelings. We were admiring the horses and petting them. I remember thinking it was weird having all this farmland and only horses. I compared it in my head to my uncle's farm, which is a lot smaller but has about 10 different types of animals, not just one. I just brushed it off and thought that maybe the owner specialized in horses. After walking through the woods, we reached the fence bordering the property. John was leading the way, I was in the middle, and Anthony was behind us. This is when we stumbled upon a rundown house with multiple trophy cars and a broken down RV. We were shocked at the discovery and snuck around some of the cars. There was also a very creepy rundown shed. It was crazy to see. I even took this video.
Fucking Corvette. Raptor. Bentley. Holy shit.
There were multiple Porsches, Range Rovers, Ford Raptors, Bentley sports cars, Corvettes, and Ferraris. The deeper we got and the more cars we saw, we realized we probably shouldn't be seeing this, since some of the cars were parted out. We suspected it was probably a criminal ring stealing cars. After we had seen all the cars, John decided it was a good idea to explore the inside of the camper while Anthony kept lookout. I held the door open for John since he's kind of the smallest, so I thought he would be best suited to explore it. There was evidence somebody was living there, fishing rods, fresh food, bedding, and other stuff. Although the camper was run down, we understood it was somebody's home, so we got out of there. I forgot to mention there were also car tires inside. We were not there to break or destroy anything, just look around. We snuck around to the back of the property where all the cars were. There were side-by-sides, and we made the connection that they were probably used to run the property. There was also a rundown shed, and when we went inside the back of it, we caught a foul, horrible smell. We kind of just brushed it off and laughed, joking that maybe it could be a body. None of us really believed it though. Then we heard the gate at the entrance of the property open and slam. It was about 1,000 feet away. We were heading back to the woodline because we didn't want anyone to see us, and that's when a van turned onto the street we were on. It was nearing dusk and the headlights were on, so we sprinted through the woods, not sure if he saw us. This is when we probably should have left, but we decided to explore the other side of the property. After walking along the outskirts and hiking through more woods, there were a lot more horses, but we finally got to the main house of the property. Again, it seemed very run down. About 25 feet to the right was another camper, or at least what looked like a camper. It was massive, about 50 feet long, and probably hadn't moved in 50 years. We almost missed it because it was completely covered in vines. Right next to it was another rundown jet ski, also covered in vines. We managed to get the door open, but didn't want to make too much noise since we were so close to the main house. Even though it seemed abandoned, we wanted to be cautious, not just because we were trespassing, but because there was similar suspicious stuff on both ends of the property, which I could only assume was connected to the car stealing ring. I knew if we were caught, it would be a problem. We snuck around the house and saw what was probably the most luxurious car on the property. Although it was run down and old, it was still an amazing sports car, a Ferrari. I didn't get a picture or video since we were still near the main house and the horses were making a lot of noise. We got sketched out on the far end of the property. There was a boat and cooler inside a fridge.
John looked around the boat, and the cooler was about 15 feet into some very thick vegetation. We joked about the probability of a body being in there. At this point, the mood was still kind of jokey because we were exploring something we weren't supposed to see. When we got closer to the freezer, another terrible smell came, like the smell of death and rot. We decided to back off, assuming the worst, and didn't want to open it in case there was something we really didn't want to see in there. We got a bad vibe, and we were on our way back when Anthony started hearing things. We paused and listened with him, and we heard the noises too. I can't really describe them. I don't know if they were just normal wood noises or if everything just seemed amplified because we were paranoid. The vegetation was about head high, and there was a rock that each of us took turns standing on to get a better view of the property. When John went up there, we were still laughing and joking. Then he turned to us, looking like he had just seen a ghost. He wouldn't speak, so I decided to get on the rock and look for myself. What I saw is seared into my brain. Over the vegetation, I saw a man sitting at a table with a black cat. That wasn't the scary part. When I looked at his face, there was no hair, no eyes, no mouth, no nose, no facial features at all. You can call me crazy, but I know what I saw. We were about 50 feet away, and it felt like the man was staring at us, but we genuinely couldn't see his eyes since he had no features. There was also a woman with him who made direct eye contact with me, and that was the moment she started running in a direction to cut us off from the property. I don't know if the man's featureless face was real, or if he had white medical tape or bandages covering it. I still can't decide, but his face was pure white and his head was very small. I still can't get it out of my head. After that, it was still dark, and we had a long hike through the woods to get back to where we came from. We felt as if we were being followed almost the whole way, and we almost took a route that was 2 miles out just to get away. There were weird noises like stomping feet, galloping, and screams. We tried to be quiet through the woods, but also tried to move quickly. We ended up making it back and made sure we weren't followed. I genuinely still don't know what that was, or if it was human, but I can't get this experience out of my head, and I know none of us will ever go back. I went to a quarry in McKinney, Texas, and I will never go back there again after what happened to me. Here is a little backstory so this will make sense. The first time I went to this quarry, it was pretty sketchy. Me and a couple of my friends, Josh and Miles, went to this quarry for cliff jumping, since we had seen some YouTube videos of people cliff jumping at it, and we found out that it was only about a half hour away from where we lived. Both Miles and I are old enough to drive, me being 16 and Miles being 17, so we thought that it would be a really good idea to go. Once we got to the quarry, it had a really sketchy vibe to it. There was a small dirt road that led up to the quarry, which made a circle around it. To the left were these ghetto-looking white buildings, which were pretty much just white metal boxes, and to the right was the fence that surrounded the rock path that led to the quarry. We drove down this road in Miles' Jeep, and there were tons of signs saying stuff like no trespassing or warning blasting zone, and there was even this big white piece of cardboard that read, "Trespassers will be shot on sight." It's important to note that in Texas, people can legally shoot you if you're on their property, but it just doesn't really happen much. We decided to drive back to the beginning of the road where there was this gravel parking lot by an old building which looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Miles parked the car, and we all reluctantly got out of the car and began our walk to the quarry. While we were walking, a truck drove right past us, and the driver just kind of looked at us with a blank expression on his face. Honestly, it was pretty scary when the car passed us, but the fact that he didn't do anything made us think maybe they don't care too much if we're on their property. We kept on walking, and then we came to the fence where we were supposed to jump to get onto the rock path that led to the quarry. We went to the smallest cliff jumping spot first, and saw a pretty big snake swimming in the water after the first 10 minutes of being there, so we decided to wander further down the quarry where we saw a decent sized cliff, about 35 feet. After depth checking it, we spent about an hour cliff jumping there before we got bored and moved on to the next cliff. We were at the very end of the quarry, and we were walking down a path to get to a bigger spot when we saw a black Hummer stop. The lady in the Hummer was probably in her mid-30s. She rolled down the window and yelled, "What the f*** are you doing on my property?" It honestly kind of shocked us all,
and I responded with saying in an innocent voice, "What do you mean? We thought this was public property." She knew we were lying straight to her face and yelled at us some more. Then she said something that I'll never forget. She picked up her phone and said, "John, get the gun." Me, Miles, and Josh all froze. We were scared to death. She said to follow her and drove slowly down the path about 20 feet to a gate. We decided to follow her. We were all saying that we were so sorry and that we would never come back again, and she let us go after saying the cops are on their way, so you better haul ass that way before they get here, and pointed towards the dirt path that led us away from her property. We told her thank you and ran faster than any of us thought we could. Then we got in the Jeep and drove away. I wish this was the end of the story, but it isn't. A couple of months later, Miles asked me if I would ever go to the quarry again, and I reluctantly told him that if we had a bigger group together, then I would go. We got a group of 5 together and went back to the quarry in my car. I drove, and after about an hour, we arrived at a church which we would be parking at, which was about 2 minutes away from the quarry. We didn't want the lady somehow seeing our car and getting our license plate number. We walked down the dirt road that led to the quarry and passed by a few cars. One car stopped next to us, and a guy who was probably in his early 20s told us to watch out for a black Hummer. We laughed and told him the story of what happened the first time that we went to the quarry, and then we were back to walking down the dirt road. We jumped the fence that surrounded the quarry and decided we would just go to the second spot, so that we would at least be a tiny bit out of sight of the dirt road. We were at the spot for about an hour and having fun when a silver van pulls up at the end of the dirt road about 25 yards away. It wasn't the black Hummer, so we weren't running away just yet, but we were getting our stuff ready in case we had to run. It was for the most part out of our sight due to trees being in between us and the van. We waited there for about a minute and thought that the guy was just doing something in the car when we heard 2 loud gunshots really close to us. The gunshots scared us half to death. The exit of the quarry was not very close, probably about 300 yards, and about 125 yards to get on the main dirt road which led off the property. I led the way, with my friend Aiden trailing not far behind me. I heard more gunshots about 40 yards away, and it sounded like he had shot about 8 shots so far, but when I looked back, I couldn't see the guy who was shooting at us. We got to the fence and jumped it, and we were now on the main dirt road that led to the exit. Out of pure luck, the guy we had talked to earlier, who had warned us about the black Hummer, was in his white truck on the dirt road. We begged him for a ride, and he gave us a ride back to the end of the property. We thanked him and then ran back to the car. We all got in the car and drove away, never to see that quarry again. Back in 2018, my cousin Ryan and I were really into urban exploration. We had been to old factories, shuttered schools, and forgotten farmhouses that looked like they were one good windstorm away from collapsing. We were not stupid about it. We checked floors before walking on them, wearing masks where there might be asbestos, and avoided any place that seemed like it might be actively guarded. Still, there was one place we'd been talking about for months that neither of us had worked up the nerve to try. The big abandoned house on the shore of Lake Harlow. It was the kind of property you only ever saw from a distance, sitting far back from the main road behind a set of tall iron gates that had been bent inward years ago. Pines and brush had grown wild around the driveway, hiding most of the place unless you caught a glimpse through the trees while driving past. Local rumors about the place were endless. The most common story was that a wealthy family had lived there in the 90s before suddenly disappearing. People claimed they'd left in the middle of the night without taking anything. Furniture, clothes, dishes, even family photos were supposedly still inside. Theories ranged from financial ruin to witness protection to something even darker. No one had ever bought it afterward, and the property had just sat there decaying for more than 2 decades. The afternoon we went, the weather was gray and still. We parked at a hiking trailhead about a half-mile from the property, and we walked in through the woods to avoid being seen from the road. As we got closer, the roofline appeared through the trees, and I realized just how big the place really was. 3 stories with tall windows and a wide wraparound porch, all in various stages of rot. Paint peeled off in long strips like sunburnt skin, and sections of the porch sagged inward. We circled around to the back, moving quietly in case there was anyone nearby. The back door was unlocked, and the moment we stepped inside, the air changed. The air was still and smelled faintly of lake water and dust. The kitchen was the first thing we saw. It looked like a movie set frozen in time. Plates were stacked neatly on the counter, and a coffee cup with a brown ring of dried residue sat beside the sink. The cabinet stood open, showing old boxes of food that were long expired. A faded calendar on the wall still hung open to May 1997. We moved through the downstairs slowly. The living room still had furniture draped in yellowed sheets. The fireplace was still filled with crumbling ash, like the last fire had burned out decades ago. Family photos were hung in the hallway, with people smiling at barbecues and dressed up for Christmas. Honestly, I got the chills for some reason as I looked at these photos. There was something eerie about seeing cheery family photos in a long-abandoned house. Some of the photos had sun-faded so badly that their faces were almost ghostly white. Upstairs is where things started to feel off. The first bedroom we entered had a perfectly made bed, but all the dresser drawers were open and completely empty. Another room's floor was entirely covered with newspapers from 1997, each one folded open to the classified ads section. I didn't think much of it until I noticed the dates. They were all from within the same week in July, and every circled ad was for private buyers looking for quiet transactions. The master bedroom was the strangest. The heavy curtains were drawn shut, but when I pulled them back, I found the windows had been boarded over from the inside. The closet door had a rusted padlock on it, and the floor in front of it was scratched, as if someone had tried to drag something heavy out but couldn't. Ryan wanted to force it open, but I talked him out of it. We didn't have tools, and I wasn't eager to break something in a place where we weren't supposed to be. He suggested we check the basement before leaving. The basement door was in a narrow hallway off the kitchen. When we opened it, a wave of damp, cool air came up that smelled strongly of mildew. The stairs were wooden. Each step down creaked like it might give way under us. The basement was big, with thick stone walls and wooden shelves along one side. Most were empty, except for a few rusted cans and a broken lantern. But in the center of the room, illuminated in our flashlight beams, were 5 chairs, all mismatched and old, but arranged in a perfect circle. Unlike everything else in the house, they weren't dusty. The seats looked recently used. I was about to whisper something to Ryan when we both froze. Somewhere above us, a door closed. The sound was clear as day, and it was followed by footsteps crossing the floor above. We killed our lights instantly and stood in the dark, barely breathing. The footsteps paused, then started again, moving toward the hallway above the basement. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. We hadn't seen any cars outside. We hadn't heard anyone else since we got here. Whoever was up there hadn't made a sound until now. The footsteps stopped again, this time directly above the basement door. Then the sound of the door handle rattling made my blood run cold. Ryan grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the far end of the basement where a small ground-level window sat broken and half covered by a rotting shutter. It was barely big enough to fit through, but we didn't care. I went first, scraping my jacket on the glass, dropping down into damp dirt outside. Ryan was right behind me. We sprinted into the tree line, not daring to look back until we were well into the woods. When I finally did glance over my shoulder, I saw the basement door wide open and someone standing in it. They were too far away to make out any details, just tall and still. It looked like their head was tilted slightly, like they were watching us. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. Both of us were so disturbed that we barely even spoke on the car ride home. That night, I just kept replaying it in my head. Everything from the chairs, to the footsteps, to the locked closet, and then that horrifying image of that figure on the porch. So a couple weeks later, Ryan called me and told me that after he made a post in a Facebook group asking if anyone knows about the history of that house, an older guy responded to his post saying that there have been sightings of someone in that house, and the first guess would of course be a squatter. However, that wouldn't explain the strange, almost ritualistic-looking circle of chairs in the basement. At this point, it's not my problem to worry about. I'm just happy we got out of there in one piece. My name is Gregory, and this happened last December when I was home alone in my house for a whole week. My girlfriend had gone to stay with her parents for the holidays, and I stayed behind because of work. I live in a quiet neighborhood in a small town in upstate New York. The houses are pretty spaced out, and most of the people on my block go away for Christmas, so I basically had the whole street to myself. At first, I liked the idea of the peace and quiet. I thought I would get a lot of rest and maybe catch up on some shows and just enjoy the coziness of the holidays for a bit. But what happened that week still lives rent-free in my head. It was on my second night alone. It was around 6:30 and already completely dark outside. It had been snowing lightly all day, and there was a white layer on my yard and driveway. I was in the kitchen making a simple dinner, just pasta and chicken. Usually my girlfriend is the one to cook our meals. I'm not much of a chef. I turned on the TV in the background to make the house feel less empty, because as happy as I was to have the place to myself for a bit, I wasn't used to it being so empty and quiet in here. While I was eating at the table, I heard something unusual. It really took me a second to figure out what it was. It sounded like singing. I muted the TV and listened. The sound was definitely coming from outside. The singing got a little clearer, and I realized the person was singing Jingle Bells. At first I thought maybe some neighborhood kids were playing around outside, but the voice didn't sound like a kid. It sounded like a grown man. I got up and walked toward the front door because that seemed like the direction it was coming from. The closer I got, the louder it got. By the time I reached the door, it sounded like the singing was coming from right on my front stoop. I felt a weird feeling in my stomach, but at that moment, I still thought maybe it was just a caroler. I opened the door, and standing in the glow of my porch light was a man around 35 years old. He wore no hat, and his coat looked too thin for the weather. But the strangest thing was that he was completely focused on singing Jingle Bells, staring down at my welcome mat like he wasn't even aware I opened the door. I remember forcing a little smile because I didn't really know what else to do. I'd never gotten Christmas carolers before. But even still, I never heard of a grown man doing it solo. It's supposed to be a group thing from what I know. He didn't look dangerous, he actually just looked sort of confused or maybe slow. I even wondered if he was special needs or something because he didn't react to me being there. He just kept singing. When he finished the song, I expected him to say something, or at least leave. But he just took a breath and started singing Jingle Bells all over again from the beginning in the same slow off-key tone. But now he was looking up at me, making direct eye contact. I felt my smile drop because it was just weird now. I stood there another minute, pretending to listen even though it felt uncomfortable. I kept thinking he would stop after the second run, but he didn't. He just looped the song. I checked my phone and realized almost 4 minutes had passed while he sang Jingle Bells over and over. Finally, I decided it was enough. I told him thank you in a polite tone, and I slowly closed the door. I thought that would send him on his way, but once the door was closed, I still heard the singing. It continued without even slowing down. I walked back to the table and sat down trying to ignore it, but the longer it went on, the harder it was to ignore. The man didn't seem normal, and it bothered me that he was still right outside my door singing the same song. I wondered if maybe he was special needs and someone was out there with him, like by the street or something, but I didn't see anyone else out there. It made the whole house feel uncomfortable, like someone weird was standing too close to my personal space. I kept eating, but I couldn't focus on the food. It went on for my entire dinner. Finally, after about 10 minutes straight, the singing stopped. The sudden silence actually made me jump because I had gotten used to the singing. I got up slowly and walked back to the front door window. When I looked outside, I expected to see the man gone, but he was still there. He had moved. Now he was standing at the end of my driveway. He was just facing my house completely still. He was no longer singing, at least I couldn't hear anything from here. He was just standing there in the snow, staring at the door. Something about that felt worse than the singing. He looked like he was waiting. I opened the door a crack and told him he couldn't be here, that this was private property and he needed to leave. He didn't move at all. The whole thing was so unnatural. I finally told him that if he didn't leave, I would call the police. Then I shut the door again. I watched him for another minute from the window, but he didn't budge. I didn't want to actually call the cops because I thought maybe there was something mentally wrong with him and I didn't want to make things worse. So instead, I decided to just go upstairs, lock my bedroom door, and try to relax. I checked out the window upstairs before changing into bedclothes. The man was gone from the driveway. Thank God. I figured the threat worked. I got into bed, turned on a lamp, and started reading my book to wind down. Maybe 20 minutes went by when I heard something from behind the house. I knew instantly what it was, unfortunately. It was the same man singing Jingle Bells again, except now it was coming from my backyard. I jumped out of bed and went to the back window. When I looked down, not only was he directly inside of my backyard, he was already looking up at my window. The man was in my backyard standing in the snow directly below my bedroom window. He was looking straight up at me while he sang. I slid open the window and yelled at him that I was calling the police. The singing stopped instantly. He stood there in total silence for about 3 seconds. Then, he suddenly burst into a full sprint toward the back door on the lower level. The second he was out of my view, I heard the most insane sound I've ever heard in my life. He started screaming at the top of his lungs, not like a normal scream. It sounded like a death metal singer, but even more insane and deranged. It echoed across the yard and through the entire house. Then came the banging. The back door shook violently as he kicked it, slammed into it, and probably tried ripping the doorknob off. I felt the vibrations from the impacts in my upstairs bedroom. I realized this guy wasn't just weird. He was trying to get inside. I grabbed my phone and called 911 right away. I begged them to hurry, telling them a man was trying to break in. I stayed on the line while holding a baseball bat with my other hand. I backed into my bedroom closet and shut myself in. The operator told me to stay hidden. I could still hear the screams and bangs from downstairs, and every second felt like he was going to break through. Then, just as suddenly as they started, the bangs stopped. Everything went silent except for my breathing. I didn't know if he left or if he got inside. I stayed completely still in the closet until the police arrived. They checked the entire outside of the house and confirmed the back door was still locked. The operator said I could come out and meet them. When I stepped outside to greet them, I finally felt like I could breathe again. We walked around the backyard and saw deep footprints in the snow, showing exactly where he had stood while singing to me through the window, and where he had run up to the back door. The footprints then led off into the woods behind my property. The cops went to follow the trail a little bit, but came back because it apparently wasn't worth going deep into the woods at night. They acted like it wasn't a big deal. They told me people act strange all the time, and that as long as I kept my doors locked, I should be fine. They didn't seem very interested in finding him, and that bothered me a lot, but I was too shaken up to argue. After they left, the house felt horribly empty and cold. I kept every door and window locked and double-checked them over and over. At that point, I was over the alone time and just wanted my girlfriend back home. I went down to my parents' place for Christmas Eve and Christmas, thankfully. As far as that man, he never returned. At least, not that I know of. This story is about my Christmas experience from about 10 years ago. I was 6 years old, since my birthday was in November, and I had just finished celebrating. Now we were getting ready for the holiday. My birthday celebration happened on the same day as the famous Odell Beckham Jr. catch. I lived with Cowboys fans, but I was a Giants fan. I remember it being talked about for the rest of the night, and even during my birthday celebration. It was an eventful birthday week, and I'm surprised I remember all of this since I was only 6. I didn't understand football, but I understood that the catch was crazy, so I was just living in the moment and happy it was my birthday, like any other kid. For my birthday, I got tickets to the Mavs-Wizards NBA game on December 30th. I was a Cavaliers fan, but since we lived in DFU outside of Dallas, I knew a lot of Mavs fans, and I was a small fan myself, so I was grateful. It was going to be my first NBA game. Christmas Day was 5 days before, and I got a brand new Odell Beckham Jr. jersey and a Mavericks shirt and sweatshirt as I was becoming a sports fan. I had a great Christmas, but one of my Christmas gifts was another Mavs game, which was on December 27th against the Oklahoma City Thunder. I was so excited to go to both games. The day came and we went to the game. The Mavs won a close one, something like 112 to 105. It was crazy to see an event like that in an NBA arena for the first time. We left the game and drove home, which was maybe 45 minutes away from the American Airlines Center. The next couple of days were normal, but I was excited to go back to that amazing stadium and atmosphere. This time we went again. I didn't know it would be the last time I went for years. At the last game, we had nice seats, like 7 rows from the court and in the middle, but this time we were maybe row 20 and in a corner area, so the experience was different. The game was going well, and I was enjoying it. The Mavs were killing them by like 20 to 30 points at halftime. Since I was a child, I wanted to roam around and get food and go to the bathroom by myself, but I was with my parents and only 6 years old, so my parents and I walked to get some food. We waited in line for maybe 20 minutes. My dad went to another restaurant inside the arena to get different food, and I stayed with my brother who was waiting in line to pay. As we talked to the worker, I walked away to throw out some of the candy they bought me before the game. I walked to a trash can maybe 30 feet away. As I got there, this tall white man came up to me and asked, "Hey, are you lost?" I shook my head and didn't say anything. He said he didn't see my parents around and told me, "Let's go look," as he grabbed my hand and walked with me. I was just a kid, so I walked with him. He took me toward the nosebleeds and said we were going to the intercom so they could announce my name and find my parents. I said okay and kept walking. We got to the top and we waited for about 10 minutes. He waited until the coast was clear and then tried pushing me towards the emergency stairs or elevator. I don't remember exactly, but I do remember there was no one around. Then I remembered stranger danger, and the guilt and fear started sinking in. I realized I shouldn't go with this man. He didn't have any credentials. When he let go of my hand to go check his phone, I ran all the way back to the stands. As I ran, I saw him standing there with a small grin on his face. I couldn't find my parents, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be somewhere safe. I found my brother, who hadn't told my parents he lost me because he didn't want to get in trouble. He asked if I was okay, and I said yes, choosing not to say anything. The game ended and the Mavs won, but I didn't care. I just wanted to go home. As we exited, I was quiet. When we got in the car, I was also quiet. My parents seemed confused that I didn't seem energetic, but I told them I was tired. As we drove home, I almost fell asleep, but then a loud honk screeched behind us. It was so loud I almost screamed. I turned around, and there he was, the same man driving a truck with maybe 3 other men inside. I couldn't tell who they were, just silhouettes. My parents yelled at them from our car when they pulled up next to us, but the men just stared. I wanted to say something so badly, but for some reason I didn't. When we got home, I went right to sleep and passed out fast. In the middle of the night, I woke up with chills. I noticed a light flashing at my window. I looked out, expecting something innocent, Santa Claus or something, but instead saw that man standing out there, shining a flashlight into my bedroom window. I screamed and ran to my parents' room, telling them someone was at my window as if it were a first-story window. They rushed outside and searched for maybe 20 minutes. They didn't find anything, and since I was a kid, they didn't believe me. They said it must have been a shadow from a car, but I know what I saw. On New Year's Eve, a couple days later, we were staying up until midnight to watch the ball drop. We were about 5 or 6 minutes away from midnight when the doorbell rang. My parents answered it. I didn't pay attention until I heard the man's voice, and I was 100% sure it was him. I told my parents, but they didn't believe me. I told them at the game he brought me to the high level, and I ran away and escaped. But they still didn't believe me. They said it was just a man handing out lost dog flyers for his cousin's dog. The night went on, and I was fine. But then a year later, on New Year's Eve, there was a knock at my bedroom window. Keep in mind, I had forgotten about the situation. I got up and looked, and there was a piece of paper on the window that said, "This New Year, you'll meet me again." I gave my parents the note, and they filed a report, but they never heard anything back. Every couple of years, I get terrified of New Year's Eve, thinking that man will come back. I told my parents I never want to go back to an NBA game, saying it wasn't my thing. But now I'm 16, and it scares me that the man knows where I live. I'm considering going to the Cavs vs. Mavs game on January 2nd or 3rd, which would be my first game since then, but I'm not sure. This experience scared me away from basketball and made me always close my curtains. I remember this night way too clearly, and even now I think about how close my family came to something really terrible. It was early December, and we decided to drive up north into the mountains to cut down a real Christmas tree. It was something my wife Marianne and I always wanted to do, and our 7-year-old son Andrew was excited about it too. The weather was cold and cloudy, and the sky had that heavy look where it feels like snow is always about to fall again. To us, that added to the Christmas vibe. The whole ride up the winding roads made me feel like a kid again. It was a while since I'd done something this unique and in the Christmas spirit, and having Andrew so excited about it just brought me back to my youth. When we finally reached the remote area Marianne found online, there were no other cars around in the parking area. There were a bunch of light posts scattered around, so we weren't in pitch black darkness if you were wondering. That's why we picked the place. Still, we did bring flashlights. We parked by a small, unmarked path that led deeper into the trees. There was a lot of snow on the ground still from the snowfall we got a few days earlier, and up this high, the snow took even longer to melt. Andrew jumped out of the car right away and started throwing snowballs at us, so I started throwing them back. We were here to have fun, so of course I was going to try to make it as memorable as possible for Andrew. I grabbed our flashlights and the axe that I planned to use to chop down a tree. We walked up the narrow path with snow crunching under our boots. Andrew kept running ahead, stopping to point at trees he thought might be perfect. The deeper we went, the more the road behind us disappeared, and the only light came from the faint moon glowing behind the thick clouds. It was so quiet that I even asked Marianne and Andrew to stop for a second, just to really take it in. There was not a single sound, maybe a light breeze, that was it. To be honest, if I had been there alone, I'd have been slightly creeped out just off the silence and darkness alone. As we walked deeper onto the trail, we had to utilize the flashlights we brought, all 3 of us. Andrew was having a lot of fun with the flashlight until the light from the parking lot was no longer visible, and it was now basically total darkness outside of the flashlights. He started to get a little nervous evidently because he asked how far we were going to go, and he made a comment on the darkness. I kept feeling like someone was watching us or like something was walking behind us, but every time I turned around, there was nothing but the empty snow path. About 10 minutes in, we finally found a spot where the trees were tall and full. Andrew ran around them in circles looking for the best one. Marianne stayed closer to me and whispered that she wanted to pick a tree fast because she had a weird feeling too. I got exactly what she meant. This was a lot creepier than I had imagined. Right then, I heard soft crunching behind us. It wasn't any of us, nor was it an animal. It sounded like boots crunching the snow, but very slowly, sneaking-like. When I turned around, I saw a man in dark clothes, standing about 20 feet back on the path. He wasn't dressed for the weather. His hands were bare and red from the cold. His jacket looked more like a windbreaker. His face looked pale and stiff, like he'd been out in the cold for way too long. Marianne grabbed Andrew's arm to pull him closer. When the man noticed we were looking at him, he suddenly smiled in an off-putting way and stepped closer. He asked if we were looking for a Christmas tree. His voice breaking the already unsettling silence was uncomfortable. His voice was deep and kind of soft. Before I could say anything, Andrew answered yes, excited again, and I felt a jolt of panic because I didn't want this man knowing anything about us. Marianne quickly told him no, that we were just walking. The man stepped closer again, and the way he moved made every hair on my arm stand up. He told us not to worry because he wasn't a park ranger. He said it like he could tell exactly why we lied, because admittedly, what we were doing was super illegal. I didn't want to talk to him at all. Something was wrong with him. He looked hungry or desperate or like he hadn't slept in days. I guess, for lack of a better word, he looked homeless. I told Marianne we should head back to the car, and she nodded, gripping Andrew's jacket. When we started walking past the man, he stood by, smiling and watching, giving slight nods as if to say goodbye as we walked. Andrew kept turning around, asking if the man was following, and we told him to stay facing forward. Every time I looked back, the man was a little bit closer than before, even though I didn't hear him speed up. I whispered to Marianne that when we reached the main road, we had to run to the car. She held Andrew's hand tighter and nodded without looking back. The man's steps stayed behind us the whole time, dragging a little like his boots were too big or too heavy. Once we got close enough to see the gap in the trees where the car was parked, I told them to go. Marianne lifted Andrew and ran as fast as she could. The only reason I felt even remotely safe was because of the axe in my hand, but I'm not a violent person and I've never had to resort to violence in my entire life. I turned around to block the path behind us for even just a second. The man had stopped walking and was just staring at me, and he put his hands up halfway, still smiling, and then he said, "I mean no harm. Why don't you get back to your truck now?" And I felt my heart skip a beat as he said this. He said truck, like he knew we came in a pickup truck. I replied back simply that we don't want any trouble. Then I turned and started hurrying back down to the lot. But halfway there, Marianne screamed my name, sounding panicked. Oh no, I thought. When I got to the truck, she showed me that both right side tires were punctured. I didn't have time to examine it for long to realize it was him. I told Marianne to call 911 immediately, but she struggled to find service at first. She walked around the snowy lot for a bit until there was reception. She never strayed too far away. I had Andrew wait in the truck, who was now clearly concerned as he watched Marianne and I freaking out. He was old enough to know something bad was happening. Marianne seemed to be having a hard time on the phone, so I took it and explained our location and that we felt threatened by a random man in the woods who may have potentially been responsible for the tires. Given the potentially unstable individual in the vicinity, and the fact that we had a child with us, police were taking this very seriously and told me to keep my family locked in the truck until police arrive and that a tow truck will be sent as well. I was instructed to keep the operator on the line while we waited, but eventually the line started getting choppy, cutting out at moments because of the poor reception. Then Marianne suddenly screamed in my ear to look and pointed towards the tree line by the path we were on. There were multiple people standing just beyond the tree line. I counted at least 3. They looked like shadows from where we were, which made the sight even more terrifying. It was like we were being stalked and hunted. Then 2 of the people started walking closer. I told the operator, and she said something that really made me uncomfortable. She asked if I had any kinds of weapons, and when I said I had the axe, she implied that if it came down to it, to use it to defend my family. By this point, Andrew was crying, and Marianne tried to calm him down. I told the operator that 2 of the figures were still walking toward the truck. They weren't running or yelling or anything. They just walked very slowly, like they knew we weren't going anywhere. The 3rd figure strangely disappeared, likely back deeper into the woods away from the light. The operator told me the police were close, but I had no idea if that meant 2 minutes or 10. I kept looking back and forth between the tree line and the road in the distance, praying to see flashing lights. I tried to talk to the operator again, but the call dropped. The second it cut off, everything felt 100 times worse. I locked the doors again, even though they were already locked. I kept my hand on the axe, gripping it so hard my knuckles hurt. As the 2 people were now within range of hearing them speak, we could hear them saying, "We're here to help," as they waved their hands in the air. We didn't recognize either of them to be that guy from earlier. "Do you think they're park rangers?" Marianne asked, and I said firmly, "Not a chance." But perhaps I said it too loud because Andrew just started crying even more, which Marianne had to try extra hard to console him. These 2 people approaching were dressed similarly to that first guy, aka way underdressed, and their clothes looked worn out, almost dirty, and they didn't seem bothered by the cold at all. But then, seemingly randomly, the 2 of them turned around and started running back in the direction they had come from. We didn't know why just yet, but it was soon clear. Never have we been so ecstatic to hear the sound of police sirens. It was getting louder fast, and eventually we saw the flashing lights coming from down the road. Coming pretty fast, actually. The police SUV entered the lot with its spotlight on, and it instantly shined in our direction. I flashed my lights to try to get the cop in the car to see the men running back into the woods. At this point, though, they were already nearly gone. But their footprints weren't. Once the SUV was next to us, 2 officers jumped out immediately with flashlights drawn, and I got out to basically get on my knees thanking them. I pointed in the direction the men ran. I said they disappeared into the trees like they had rehearsed where to go. The police told us to stay inside the truck while they searched, and more units showed up within minutes. 1 officer stayed with us. Andrew was no longer scared, but rather once again excited at the commotion and the sight of police officers. After a long search, the police came back and told us what I already knew they were going to say. They didn't find anyone, just tracks in the snow that went deep into the woods and eventually spread out in different directions. They didn't know if the people lived somewhere out there or if they were part of some kind of camp deeper in the mountains. They said sometimes drifters or squatters stay hidden in remote areas during the winter. The tow truck eventually arrived, and the police stayed around us the entire time until our truck was loaded up. We had to sit in the back of a patrol car to stay warm while they finished everything. No one really said much. Marianne held Andrew in her lap, and I just stared out the window, watching the dark tree lines, half expecting to see someone standing there again. On the ride back home, none of us talked. It was like all of us were afraid that saying anything out loud would make it real again. We didn't try to cut down a Christmas tree ever again. We didn't even go back to that mountain area. Even now, 10 years later, I refuse to go anywhere near it. To this day, what scares me the most is the thought that they had been watching us long before we even noticed them. They saw us arrive in that parking lot because they knew to strand us by slashing my tires, and they were waiting for us to go deep enough into the trees so we wouldn't make it back to the truck. We were lucky we trusted our instincts enough and decided to leave for the truck almost right away. We were also lucky I was holding an axe, which may have dissuaded them from doing something crazy. I don't like thinking about how close we came to potentially never going home. I still think about this one night from when I was 9 years old. It was a few days before Christmas. My parents both had things to do that night, and since I was almost 9, they felt okay leaving me home for a little bit. My mom had to run to the grocery store to get some stuff for Christmas dinner, and my dad was working late like he usually did in December. I was sitting on the couch watching a Christmas movie probably, and eating cookies by the fireplace and tree. Outside, it was already dark, even though it was still relatively early, and I remember the Christmas lights flashing on the houses across the street. It was normal, until the doorbell rang. The only reason this made me stop and look was because it was rather late and random for someone to ring the bell, and my mom always told me never to answer the door when I was alone. My parents never ring the bell, obviously, since they have keys. I got up and walked to the door anyway because I wanted to look through the peephole. When I put my eye up to it, I saw there was a man standing on the porch wearing a Santa Claus suit. It was the full thing, too. The red coat, the hat, the beard, everything. But he didn't look like a normal, friendly Santa. He wasn't holding anything besides what looked like a clipboard, and he was standing way too close to the door like he was waiting for me to unlock it. I didn't know what to say at first, so I just kind of whispered, "Who is it?" The man moved his head a little closer to the door like he was trying to see through the peephole or hear me better, and in that moment, he figured out right away that I was a kid. He did, I guess, what was his best Santa impression, as he said he was Santa and that he had gifts for me, and that I should open the door. At 9 years old, I wasn't stupid, and I didn't believe in Santa anymore. My parents taught me about strangers. I told him to go away and that I didn't need anything, and I tried to sound brave, but my voice cracked. The man went silent for a second, and then he asked me if I was home alone. As soon as he said that, I knew to walk away. I instantly felt stupid for even letting him know I was home. I didn't answer him. I stepped back from the door and walked fast to the living room because I suddenly felt too scared to stand near it. I sat on the couch and grabbed a pillow and stared at the TV like acting normal would make the fear go away. But then I heard the doorknob twist. He was testing if the door was locked. I wanted to scream for help, but nobody was home.
I waited and hoped he would leave, but a moment later, I heard another sound from the back of the house. It was the back doorknob twisting. It happened so fast after the front door that I bet he ran around the house to the back. That door was even weaker than the front one, and we almost never used it. I felt frozen in place, and all I could think about was that my house only had 2 doors and this man was trying both. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the phone and dialed my mom's number. When she answered, I started talking really fast, trying not to cry. I told her someone was trying to get into the house and he was dressed like Santa. My mom got serious right away and told me she was coming home right now and that I should not open any doors no matter what. She told me to stay in the